Chapter 1286. Lu Xiaoyi knew that this was old White Brow's intention. He wanted to tell him that Xiao Yao had everything under control. Was that really the case? After the meeting, the two of them went to a quiet room and sat opposite each other. Old White Brow looked at him with interest. 500 years. Before you came to Zhou Xian, you were already in the middle stage of Jin Dan, and now you're E-Master. Compared to your background, this speed is a bit slow. But fortunately, you made it in time. Lu Xiaoyi laughed dryly. I'm sorry to disappoint you. I've always been terrible in the upper realm, and I'm used to being at the bottom. It's my fault. Old White Brow nodded. It's good that you can come up. Don't worry about how you came up. I remember that there was another person with you. There's no news about him recently. Lu Xiaoyi did not hide it. He went back to explore. We didn't know the way home. We wanted to wait for you to give us some advice, but we couldn't find a chance, so we had to do it ourselves. Old White Brow pretended not to know his dissatisfaction. We didn't tell you because we didn't know either. You're an E-Master now, so you should know that the space crack, the reverse space, and the main world are two different concepts. We can send Jin Dan through the space crack, but we can't send Yuanying Jinjuan over. The exploration of the reverse space has been going on. Buddhism is the main force, and we're the supplement, but this kind of exploration takes a lot of time. The reverse space is not as stable as the main world. It's actually a curved surface, and there are some places that need to be crossed. Let's put it this way, Buddhism knows much more than us Taoism, because they work harder. According to our estimation, we've completed more than half of it, but in the last part, we'll face more interference. You know very well that the power behind you is never willing to endure. Old White Brow had always been unwilling to talk to him. This was the first time, but he was very talkative. Traveling through the universe over a long distance. An individual and an army are two different concepts. An individual can go, but an army may not. Later, I will open the road sign system to you. You have to know that even in the 7 sects of Taoism in Zhou Xian, there are only a handful of people who are qualified to know this kind of authority. They are all young spirits, and you are the only exception. Lu Xiaoyi bowed. Thank you for your trust, senior brother. Although I don't know what my family's attitude is, I think we can find a common ground. I'm willing to be the bridge between us. Bai Mei nodded his head in satisfaction. This was also the reason why he had let this kid go. In the future, it would be time for him to reap the rewards. However, it was hard to say how much he would reap. It would depend on the ability of this person in front of him. Based on his usual performance, this guy was a troublemaker, more troublemaker than all the other cultivators in the Unfettered Wanderer. This was the character of a Taoist orthodoxy, and there was no way to learn it. What do you think about Heaven's Choice? Lu Xiaoyi smiled bitterly. The time is too short, unable to penetrate deeper. Therefore, I can't make a judgment. The diplomatic mission was useful, but it was also useless. It has an effect on the small and medium-sized nations, but I doubt it will have any effect on the large nations. They will act according to their own ideas, and this is not something that can be easily changed. I feel that the structure of Heaven's Choice is similar to our Zhou Xian. Could there be differences between Taoism and Buddhism? But as for what the differences are, I can't find out. Senior brother also knows. I'm just a newbie who has only become a monarch for a few years. What Xian Liuzi and the others couldn't do, I can't do either. Bai Mei pointed at him. You're not a newbie. You're a hater. Like you said, Junior Brother Changdi and the others also have the same feeling. But the question is, what can we do about it? Lu Xiaoyi smiled. In Zhou Xian's current situation, the thing that we Taoists don't want to see the most is what we can do in Heaven's Choice. Bai Mei nodded. In the upper realm of Zhou Xian, what we're most worried about is the premature separation between Buddhism and Taoism. This will cause internal strife and give our opponents an opportunity to seize. Therefore, both sides have been trying their best to maintain this fragile balance. No one wants to be the first to start a dispute and have a reputation of internal strife. I don't think there's such a problem in your hometown. Lu Xiaoyi was embarrassed. Oh, where are we? We're used to nipping at the bud, but we don't raise it for the new year. Bai Mei was speechless. They really couldn't learn how to deal with this kind of situation because their camp didn't have a valiant and bloodthirsty sword vein. How did the cultivation world reach a balance in that place? Was this the question he had always wanted to understand? As far as he knew, that place didn't only have the valiant sword vein, but also the more powerful orthodox Taoist. How did they fit into the same pair of pants? This was a technical job. If they didn't fit properly, they wouldn't be able to walk. Unfortunately, this guy in front of him came to Zhou Xian when he was in Jindan. At his level then, it was difficult for him to understand the truth. Otherwise, he would really want to ask. However, he couldn't help it. How do you solve this problem in your hometown? I mean, the problem of the internal strife getting deeper and deeper? Lu Xiaoyi shrugged. There's no solution. Our internal strife is worse than the one in Zhou Xian. However, we usually solve our internal problems through external pressure. Bai Mei sighed. This guy said it so easily, but what he actually meant was that they used external war to solve their internal problems. To rob, to plunder, to rob, and then to divide the spoils. No one else could learn this method. Not to mention that the people in Zhou Xian didn't have such character traits. Even if they did, how many years would they have to plunder the boundary near the upper realm of Zhou Xian? Zhou Xian couldn't move, so it was completely unsolvable. Lu Xiaoyi decided to remind him, even if it was a little unnecessary. Senior brother, I think that there's a third party in Zhou Xian and Heaven's Choice. That's the close to 3,000 small realms in Zhou Xian and the close to 10,000 small and medium-sized countries in Heaven's Choice. They're also in an era of change and have the same desire. If you ignore this point, you'll easily pay the price in the future changes. In fact, he was still careful. He didn't mention that there was actually a powerful force in Heaven's Choice, which was the immemorial beasts. This was his secret. He could achieve a certain tactical goal at a certain time in the future, but there was no need to spill the beans. He also didn't mention that there was actually a very strong force in Zhou Xian, which was the sword vein force led by Yao Ying. Although they were few in number when they stirred up a storm, who dared to say that they didn't take advantage of the situation? This was the biggest common problem of Taoism and Buddhism. They had always been suppressing the heterodox factions, but they never thought that such small orthodoxies would unite one day and overthrow the two big mountains. In normal times, doing so is very risky and basically impossible. However, now was the early stage of a great change. When both Taoism and Buddhism suffered, who could guarantee that these heterodox factions would still be so obedient? Chapter 1287. Bai Mei remained silent. His perspective was different from Lu Xiaoyi's. He had confidence in his control of the realm due to his deep involvement in the realm. Lu Xiaoyi valued the uprising of the small sects, but Bai Mei valued the suppression and infiltration over a long period of time. Can I know the news of my distant friends in the immortal of Zhou upper realm all these years? Lu Xiaoyi played it down. Bai Mei refused. It's too complicated. It's too complicated to count. There are too many variables with the passage of time. There are those who seek revenge, but they are still in the minority. Most of them are limited by their lack of strength and distance. They gradually give up because of the passage of time. I'll be honest with you. This is a normal grudge between realms. Every injustice has its perpetrator, and every debt has its debtor. Since you've acted this way, you naturally have to bear the consequences. As a part of the cultivation world, we won't pull out a list for you. This is the principle of Zhou Xian Taoism. He was referring to the realms that have been plundered by the fifth ring in the past 10,000 years. There were also the human realms that had been asking for help from Zhou Xian, but had never received an actual response. In this regard, the Taoism of Zhou Xian did not lean towards the fifth ring. They hoped for a good order in the cultivation world and were very dissatisfied with the black sheep of the fifth ring. Of course, it only stopped at the point of moral condemnation. Now, in order to guard against natural selection, there were faint signs of collusion. In the end, as long as they could survive, there was no fixed standard for right and wrong in the cultivation world. Using words was better than using force. Lu Xiaoyi had already expected this and did not have much hope. For these realms, as long as the fifth ring made a list of the places they had plundered, it would be clear. There were countless capable people in the fifth ring. It was impossible that they could not solve these problems, so he was not worried. Senior brother, I've returned to the mountain this time and will leave in a few years. I want to borrow a medium to large anti-space floating raft from a sect. Do you think it's feasible? Bame did not hesitate. It's not possible for others, but it's possible for you. But I want to know your general movements and intentions. Very fair. Lu Xiaoyi didn't try to hide it either. His shadow shaking technique was empty. In fact, there were many things that couldn't be hidden. If people were suspicious and went to investigate, it would cause a lot of trouble. As you know, I have a small Dao sect in Shaking Shadow. Over the years, we've developed some feelings for each other. Since we're both members of the Sword Vein, we should help each other. In the Heaven's Choice continent, there's a nameless sword steel that is very suitable for swordsmen to comprehend the Dao. I was thinking that in this chaotic world, I should at least let my brothers have some ability to protect themselves. Borrowing the floating raft is for the convenience of entering and exiting. It can secretly pull them into Heaven's Choice, and there is no other purpose. However, most of them are just yuanying. There are very few true sovereigns, so they can't do anything. Bame nodded his head, thinking that this little guy was quite capable. Just by entering Heaven's Choice, he was able to find such a channel. However, this kind of secret was not something he could ask. It was a personal secret, but he could beat around the bush. Not only can I practice my swordsmanship, I can also gather some information, right? Since it's convenient to enter and exit, there are countless possibilities. Lu Xiaoyi knew what he meant. Basically, they won't go out to gather information. What can yuanying gather? The Sword Vein is not very popular in Heaven's Choice. If I really let it out, I'm afraid it won't be easy to get it back. Therefore, my goal is actually very simple. As for what can be passed in and out, Zhou Xian's cultivators are actually not restricted from entering Heaven's Choice. The 7 upper sects all have scouts in Heaven's Choice, and everyone is well aware of this. The Shaking Shadow Realm cultivators can enter only because their realm is not high enough. If you really want me to bring a few dozen true sovereigns in, I'm afraid I don't have the ability to do so. Bame smiled, but did not say anything. However, he did not ask any further. The little guy was not lying. He just did not say everything. He had lived for thousands of years and was well aware of worldly affairs. He had long understood that the so-called cooperation was definitely not about exposing each other's secrets. It was about leaving space for each other in trust. Of course, he was the same. On the surface, Zhou Xian's upper realm is calm, but in fact, there are turbulent undercurrents. All kinds of rumors become more and more distorted as they spread. Even the slightest bit of big news will be pulled into the changing of the era, and then it will be multiplied and exaggerated, creating something out of nothing and exaggerating it. Therefore, I think that the Shaking Shadow Realm cultivators can cooperate with Carefree Travel to further their studies and spread the news that everyone has come to Carefree Mountain to cultivate. This way, we can avoid unnecessary suspicion. Lu Xiaoyi nodded his head in thanks. The old fox was very thoughtful, but there was a deeper meaning. For example, was it to show that the Shaking Shadow Realm and Carefree Travel had an unbreakable relationship? He really wanted to know. Senior brother, the size of the main world is not limited to just our 2 realms, right? Are there no other superior cultivation realms of similar size? My hometown is too far away, and Zhou Xian is well prepared. In my opinion, they are not good targets, but I don't know why Heaven's Choice is only targeting these 2. Bame snorted coldly. Of course there are many. From what I know, there are a few large realms with suitable distance, sufficient size, and abundant spiritual vigor, such as the Anchor Chain Realm, Sunken Continent Realm, Radiant Realm, Eternal River Realm, and so on. In terms of size, they are only slightly smaller than Zhou Xian, but they are larger than your hometown. The distance is moderate, and the spiritual vigor is abundant. Most importantly, the cultivation power in their realms is not enough to compare with Zhou Xian. However, Heaven's Choice's consideration is that distance and size are secondary. The key is to borrow the power of the universe. Lu Xiaoyi humbly asked for guidance. I'd like to hear the details. Bai Mei's eyes became deep. The few realms that I mentioned, needless to say, are even better than your hometown, and the difficulty of attacking them is also much lower. However, the problem is that attacking these realms is just a normal realm-level expedition in the countless universes. They have no influence. They can't achieve the result of the universe moving with a single attack. If everyone pretends not to see, then Heaven's Choice will just occupy another territory. In terms of size, it is far from Heaven's Choice continent. Do Heaven's Choice lack territory? Lu Xiaoyi was deep in thought. Bai Mei continued. Heaven's Choice has never lacked territory. They also don't lack spiritual opportunity. If Heaven's Choice continent is placed in the origin world, Zhou Xian, the #1 realm in the universe, will definitely change hands. There is nothing to say about this. Is it because of the collapse of the Great Tao that they need to come to the origin world to try their luck and find opportunities? Even Yuanian cultivators with a bit of knowledge understand that under the change of epochs, the positive and negative realms treat everyone equally. There is no favoritism. If you can't achieve Tao in the negative realms, can you achieve Tao in the origin world? What a joke. These reasons are just rumors released by the higher-ups of Heaven's Choice, a kind of guidance for the cultivators below. Those peak young gods who truly control the power of Heaven's Choice, including those Heaven's Choice half-immortals who have gone to the unspeakable lands, are definitely not so superficial. Their direction has long been decided, even before the half-immortals gather. Now, they're just following the predetermined path and walking down step by step. Lu Xiaoyi already understood, but he was still waiting for Bai Mei's explanation. This was also a kind of communication technique. If you understood it too quickly, how could you let your master have any face? The key point was that it would make people guard against you for no reason, not daring to say anything in front of you. Chapter 1288. P.S. Thank you to Orange Fruit 2021 for your tip. I won't say anything else. I won't say anything more. I won't say anything more. I won't say anything about paying back my debt. I can't afford to say anything. I'm even doubting whether I can return this book after I finish writing it. So don't rush me. It's useless. I have no overnight food. My draft box is empty. This is the last eruption. I've sent out all the drafts. There are only 9 chapters left. From now on, I'll scramble to come up with 2 chapters for tomorrow morning. If you see only 1 chapter, don't be surprised. It's not the starting point's fault. I drank too much wine. Thank you again. You're very kind. I'm afraid I can't repay you with more chapters. I can only use quality. Let's go. I'll buy 2 tails of pig head meat and half a caddy of wine. Let's celebrate. Bai Mei said word by word. The reason why I chose Zhou Xian and the 5th ring is actually very simple. The beginning of the new era begins when you become a 5th ring cultivator. It begins with the sword vein behind your back. As the saying goes, there's a beginning and an end. Both Taoists and Buddhists pay attention to this. How can it be called a beginning and an end? It can stand with you as a 5th ring cultivator. It can also destroy you as a 5th ring cultivator and replace you. No matter which one it is, it can be regarded as having a beginning and an end. It's following the trend of the heavenly Tao. That way, they would be able to obtain the greatest benefits in a new era. It's returning to the starting point for the end. To Heaven's Choice, it has no choice. If it stands with such a large body, will you, a 5th ring cultivator, be willing to accept it? How can you allow others to sleep soundly on your bed? To Heaven's Choice, with such a large body and the thickness of a cultivator, will it obediently run over to be your 5th ring cultivator's underling? It's also impossible. So, there's only one result. It will destroy you and replace you. So, don't blame Zhou Xian for leading the wolves into your room. Such a large pack of wolves, if they don't want to go, can Zhou Xian attract them? 70% of the trend of the universe. Zhou Xian only deepened their impression. In a cultivation world, this is understandable. Lu Xiaoyi nodded silently. He had to admit that Old White Eyebrows was very insightful. Then, since there's a 70% chance that he's in the 5th ring road, why should Zhou Xian get the other 30%? The white-browed elder sighed. Did you go to the core of Zhou Xian when you reached the nascent soul stage? Lu Xiaoyi was surprised. He seemed to understand. Yes, what do you mean? A wry smile appeared on Bai Mei's face as he said, the Tao Conjurer of Fate was once a citizen of Zhou Xian. Of course, at that time, this place wasn't called Zhou Xian, and the geological environment wasn't like this. Not to mention, there wasn't such a prosperous cultivation civilization. However, the core of the earth was indeed the soil that had once nurtured the Tao of Fate cultivators. Even if it later collapsed and formed the Zhou Xian upper realm. Lu Xiaoyi was somewhat puzzled. Morality collapses first, and fate is only a latecomer. It was passive. How could it represent the general trend of the universe? If that's the case, doesn't that mean that the home realms of every Tao fusing cultivator who's going to collapse will become the battleground for Tao forces? The white-browed elder shook his head. What if the Tao Conjurer of Fate collapsed on his own accord? What if he was in cahoots with your sword immortal? The collapse of morality was indeed a bad start and caused the general trend of the universe to change. However, this process was too long, so long that it might take a few million years before it gradually revealed itself. If that's the case, who would care about this after such a long time? Then it wouldn't be a big deal. However, the collapse of fate affected the speed of the trend of change. From millions of years to tens of thousands of years, it caused all living beings to be unable to live in peace. Although no one had evidence, anyone with a discerning eye could see that this was a collaboration. First, the Tao Conjurer of Fate was the initiator. Then, fate added fuel to the fire and suddenly accelerated. Who was the mastermind? Who was the accomplice? It would never be clear. It could be that your sword immortal acted on his own initiative, and then the Tao Conjurer of Fate sensed the change in the heavenly Tao and immediately responded. However, it could also be that the Tao Conjurer of Fate came up with the idea behind the scenes. After all, the Tao Conjurer of Fate had been conjugated for millions of years, and he could see more clearly, accurately, and thoroughly. They hit it off immediately and were in cahoots. This matter will never be settled. In terms of time, of course, you're the fifth ring first and have 70% of the momentum. I, Zhou Xian, have 30% of the momentum. Big brother, not second brother. No one can escape. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. What the F***CK? Zhou Xian's second brother was very nimble in pushing the blame to Big Brother. Brothers were birds in the same forest, but when disaster struck, they flew away separately. Two Tao conjurers might appreciate each other, but the cultivators below them wouldn't care about that. They were all methods of killing fellow Taoists, but not me. So, Zhou Xian spared no effort to push the Heaven's Chosen One to the fifth ring. The white brows didn't look ashamed at all. If it were you, would you push him? Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. If it were him, he would push him too. In a sense, in the position of Zhou Xian, pushing him out was the only choice. The white brow's vision was probably the vision of the higher-ups of the Heaven's Chosen One. Of course, it was also the vision of those old foxes of the fifth ring. It was indeed not something a new god like him could compare to. He had learned a lot from it. According to the old white brow's theory, the Heaven's Chosen One could only choose between the fifth ring and Zhou Xian if he walked out of the anti-space battle, because there was no point in attacking other realms. Not only would he suffer losses, but he would also have to face the realms of these two major powers. Rather than fighting late, it was better to fight early and solve the problem once and for all. This problem couldn't be discussed too deeply for fear of hurting feelings. Thus, he changed the topic. Senior brother, what's the recent movement of the 10,000 Buddhas and the Bitter Zen Temple? The white brows raised. Quiet. Extremely quiet. It's so quiet that it makes one panic. It's so quiet that we have to pay more attention to them. Lu Xiaoyi pondered. Then why do you think they're so quiet? The white brows concluded. When the heart is calm, it's naturally quiet. It can only be said that the Buddhists have already made plans and are just waiting for the right time. Lu Xiaoyi shook his head and smiled bitterly. In this regard, The Taoists were far inferior to the Buddhists. They were overcautious and hesitant, and in the changes of the general trend, they lacked an indomitable momentum. It couldn't be helped. Only the weak would have the mentality to press forward and cut off all means of retreat. As the Taoists who had ruled the universe for millions of years, how could they have such a mentality? The most important thing to do was to be stable and maintain the status quo. As the saying goes, one's but determines one's head. The exchange with the white brows was very fruitful. Perhaps it was because he had been ignored for too long, or perhaps he was afraid that he would make things awkward because he didn't know anything, or perhaps it was for some unspeakable purpose. In any case, Lu Xiaoyi was very satisfied. Of course, he would not ask about some sensitive things, such as the specific countermeasures of the Zhou Xian Taoists, the secrets of the heaven and earth chessboard, the domain alliance of Zhou Xian in the nearby universe, the arrangement of the heaven's chosen one, and so on. He got what he wanted the most. Of course, it was borrowed. A medium-sized anti-space floating raft that could fit 50 people and the route to the fifth ring. What made him heave a sigh of relief was that it was the same as his and Qing Xian's judgment. Unfortunately, Qing Xian could not see these and did not know how this guy was doing. Where did he go? Everyone was doing their best. Being in this position, he had to consider more. In comparison, he was actually more willing to be a simple fighter and pursue his own swordsmanship. Where was the direction? He could not pin his hopes on the heavens, chosen one, not being able to find the way. This was too unreliable. In fact, who was more familiar with the anti-space than the heaven's chosen one? He was even more familiar with the people of Zhou Xian. The reason why he seemed to rely on the road sign system of Zhou Xian was perhaps a smokescreen? Very likely. Chapter 1289. After Lu Xiaoyi and Bai Mei had a heart-to-heart talk, Lu Xiaoyi began to turn his attention to his own martial arts. As a new master, he still had a lot of foundation to build. Cultivation was not only about swordsmanship, but also many other things, especially about the various benefits after becoming a monarch. It was very practical and vast. In this aspect, the collection of orthodox Taoism far surpassed the Xianyuan sword vein. He had the Sword Dao tablet to improve his swordsmanship cultivation, but this did not mean that he could ignore the hundreds of thousands of years of legacies of other orthodoxies. Only by learning could he broaden his horizons. If he only saw his own orthodoxy, he would never surpass Crow Ancestor. Moreover, he vaguely felt that Crow Ancestor's swordsmanship concept was beyond the scope of Xuanyuan's tradition. This point might not be felt much in the Foundation realm, but it would be more obvious if he went up to the other 8 realms. Innovation, especially in regards to swordsmanship, had always been rooted in his philosophy. It did not make sense that he could do it when he was in the Foundation realm. Now that he had become a monarch, he had regressed and started to walk the same path as others. To put it bluntly, his unique flying sword form also forced him to walk his own path. One person's ideas were short, but many people's ideas were better. To open his mind, not only did he need his own understanding over the years, but he also needed the accumulated experience of countless cultivators over hundreds of thousands of years. Only by standing on the shoulders of giants could he see further. As one of the 9 upper sects of Zhou Xian, Carefree Travel had the most complete monarch system. It would take a long time to figure it out. It was also here that he began to purposefully come into contact with the 3 lives concept. This was the only way to deal with the sun god in the future. After the adventure outside the Heaven's Choice continent, he was secretly vigilant. When he faced the sun god in the future, he could not only kill his opponent in the real world. First, he would come into contact with the 3 lives concept of Taoism in the Carefree Travel system. Then, when he entered the Sword Dao tablet, he would learn Crow Ancestor's 3 lives killing technique. Was the 3 lives realm for this? For him, this was very difficult because he did not have enough experience in Foundation. The Tao of Time was only at the entry level. The only foundation was the Heavenly Heart strategy that he had been practicing since Yuanying. Before he completely understood the 3 lives, he had to try his best not to provoke the sun spirit. He warned himself. Apart from cultivating, he continued to tease perfected Lord Xiaojia. That was one of his pleasures. Here, you went to the Heaven's Choice continent. Did you reunite with your 3 Heaven's Choices? Kawa was very curious. Cultivators who had reached the monarch level shouldn't be so superficial. Sitting down and discussing the Tao should be the main topic. How could they talk about trivial things all day long? But when she was with this guy, she only wanted to ask about these irrelevant things, which was completely different from how she usually acted in front of the disciples. She had been led astray, and she believed that she could not discuss the Tao with this kind of person, because he would also lead you astray without even saying 3 sentences. Lu Xiaoyi said regretfully, "She thinks I'm taken and doesn't want to see me. I kept explaining to them that you had already abandoned me, but they just didn't believe me. You see, you made me lose 3 beautiful women, so shouldn't you compensate me?" Kawa ignored his crazy words. In Heaven's Choice is too far away, so there's no need to talk about it. Let's talk about something closer. I heard that when you were in the Yellow Court continent, you harmed 2 of the Yellow Court sex flower fairies. What are their names again? Lu Xiaoyi was very dafa. What do you mean by harm? Senior apprentice sister, you really don't know how to speak. That's called being in love, okay? One of them was called Xia Bingji. As for our relationship, he was considered my ex-husband. Later on, I was kicked away because he was like you, wholeheartedly focused on the Tao. The other one was called Inya. I was even more wronged. Before I could enter the alley, I was treated as the target of someone's Tao of severing emotions. With a swoosh, I was chopped off, just like a chicken's eye growing on my leg. Don't you think I was wronged? Kawa couldn't help but laugh. This person had this kind of ability. Obviously, a very unbearable, very dirty, or very sad story would definitely become very funny when it came from his mouth. It was also because of this that they could get close to each other without any barriers. He was like a family member who was always in trouble. When he was by her side, she felt that he was very annoying, but when he left, she would miss him, because only when she was with him would she be truly relaxed, wholeheartedly relaxed. Duo, where did you come from? Why are you so mysterious? Actually, from the first time I saw you, I felt that you were a spy. After guarding against you for so many years, I didn't expect that I still couldn't guard against you. From a spy, you were promoted to a traveling Taoist? I don't know how senior brother, but Mei was fooled by your flowery words. She shouldn't have asked these questions. This was the self-restraint of a true monarch. Because Barmei didn't say anything, the subtext was that they shouldn't ask either. However, she was not asking as a cultivator now, but as a very close friend. Therefore, she didn't want to be restricted by those rules. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. You don't know, do you? Without the cooperation of your carefree wanderer, by Mei, how could I have infiltrated? Even if I'm a spy with a license. As for where I came from, it's not a secret. How many higher-ups in Zhou don't know? It's just that everyone is deceiving themselves and others, holding a lantern in their hands to watch the fire. Have you heard of the Xianyuan sword sect? Have you heard of the 5th ring domain? I was sent from there to infiltrate your inner circle and carry out the strategy of disintegration and defeat you one by one. In the end, I'll take away the name of Zhou Xian as the number 1 domain in the universe. My great 5th ring domain will replace it and unify the universe forever. Let me ask you, are you afraid? Kawa curled her lips and ignored his nonsense. She couldn't be bothered with the general trend of the universe. Some people couldn't wait to follow the general trend of the heavenly Tao when they cultivated. Some people would rather cultivate their own post-celestial Tao as long as it was what they liked. Fighting was a way to live. Not fighting was also a way to live. It was precisely because she understood this point that she went with the flow and walked to where she was now. The topic quickly returned to what she was interested in. For someone as fickle as you, you must have a lover in your own domain, right? You've been out for hundreds of years. Haven't you ever worried? Lu Xiaoyi sighed. What's there to worry about? I can only turn grief into appetite, turn worry into fickleness. I'm not heartless. I can turn into an earthworm to protect flowers. Jia Hua didn't understand. Why do you have to turn into an earthworm? Shouldn't you turn into spring mud? Lu Xiaoyi was shameless. You don't understand, do you? The soil also needs to be maintained. For example, loosening the soil, watering, and so on. Yes, in my original sect, I also have a senior sister. She's a very good person. If there's a chance in the future, I'll introduce you to her. We'll definitely become good friends. Kawa didn't quite believe him. To become friends, we need to have similar temperaments and similar personalities. Are you so sure? Lu Xiaoyi laughed. You'll definitely become friends. Because your temperaments are very similar. You're both people who will raise your swords and cut people down after being peeked at in the shower. Chapter 1290. Lu Xiaoyi had a relatively peaceful life again. Cultivating, seeking advice, and lecturing. Cultivation was a personal matter. Lecturing was a matter between him and perfected Lord Xiaojia. Seeking advice? Since things had come to this, he naturally could not let go of White Brows, the most powerful teacher in the carefree travel. The main thing was the 3 lives. This was his most unforgettable worry. It was not that he wanted to provoke the sun god, but based on the trajectory of his growth over the years, he was destined to be unable to avoid conflict with the sun god. Seeking advice from White Brows was also a form of attitude, solemnly swearing that he was a member of the carefree travel team. This was not convincing at all. There were too many variables in this. In the cultivation world, the teacher was the most important. When you formally sought guidance from the head of a sect, it was a tacit agreement. Even if there was no formal master-disciple relationship, the establishment of karma was the most unbreakable. Only then could White Brows be truly at ease. This was the mystery of Taoism. It was not about how important the mission was or how great the contribution was. Instead, it was about how you sought guidance from him, and he answered you without holding back. The 3 lives? White Brows laughed involuntarily. He knew that this little fellow would seek guidance from him, but he did not expect it to be in this aspect. Under normal circumstances, most cultivators who had just entered the Yin spirit realm would seek guidance on some questions regarding the Tao realm. However, for a swordsman, it was not surprising that he wanted to kill someone in a hurry. The 3 lives is a huge topic. It is so huge that a poor cultivator might not be able to understand it in his entire life. There must be a similar description in your sword range's orthodoxy. In my carefree travel, there are even more such topics. These can all be learned through self-cultivation, so I won't say more. Let's talk about some of my insights on the 3 lives. Whatever comes to mind. Lu Xiaoyi nodded in agreement. The most important thing for an elder to impart Tao was whether he was willing to share his own insights with you. It was not something that was written on jade slips that were widely spread. One was a widely expanded version. The other was a hidden secret that cannot be mentioned in the same breath. Speaking of the 3 lives, the first thing we need to talk about is the sects related to the 3 lives. In Buddhism, in Taoism, in the primordial age, and now they're all different. There are differences in the understanding of Taoism, and there are also differences in the development of cultivation. For those of us who study the Tao, let's talk about Taoism. There were all sorts of strange schools of thought, but their general direction was the same. Traditionally, the 3 lives were the past, present, and future. However, the cultivation doctrine is changing with each passing day. Now, everyone is leaning towards the ego and self-transcendence. In fact, the essence is the same. It's just that something new has been mixed in. Lu Xiaoyi listened quietly, not daring to interrupt. Everyone has 3 lives. Cultivators had it, mortals had it, and even immortals had it. However, the 3 lives of immortals combined into one was a completely different matter. Since ancient times, the concept of 3 lives have been widely discussed, and there was no final conclusion. The most crucial point of disagreement was whether or not there was such a space and time where there were countless past, present, and future versions of you existing in different dimensions. If so, wouldn't space and time be too complicated? There are so many humans in the universe. Everyone has countless past lives and countless future lives. Just thinking about it makes one's scalp tingle. Lu Xiaoyi's heart was filled with sorrow. This was his greatest doubt about the theory of 3 lives. According to the most ancient 3 lives theory, he alone had countless previous lives and future lives. Then, would there also be an immortal court in these previous lives and future lives? Were they different immortal courts? Or did they have a common immortal court? How did his past and future lives intersect with other people's past and future lives? If the past and future lives of trillions of people were torn together, how could they be clearly separated? Therefore, he had always been suspicious about the existence of past and future lives. Even if there were countless different dimensions in the universe at the same time, he doubted that the heavenly Tao had the energy to manage it. Managing the universe in reality was already a mess, and it had to be restarted. If it was added with trillions and trillions of times, even the heavenly Tao would be exhausted to death. Therefore, there was a new doctrine later on: the ego, and the superego. This kind of theory turned the materialized 3-lifetime study into a form of ideology. In other words, your past and future lives are just a deep projection in the depths of your soul. They do exist. They just exist in your consciousness. The universe is such a universe. The world is such a world. An immortal court. An immortal court. You can't go back to the past. Even if you really go back, it's only an ideological return. It's just a dream. You can't go to the future either. Even if you really go, it's just a dream. And dreams will end one day. Lu Xiaoyi muttered. So, it's actually the obsessions in the deepest part of a cultivator's consciousness that are cut? Obsessions about the past? Visions of the future? The white-browed man nodded. Yes, everyone has obsessions. The ancient corpse severing Tao is the peak of severing obsessions. But in fact, a cultivator severing obsessions doesn't just start from being a half-immortal. It starts from the moment you step into the door of cultivation. It's just that your obsessions during foundation establishment are very superficial and childish. For example, hatred, kinship, and all kinds of things in the mortal world. We Taoists call these mental states. In fact, to put it bluntly, they're the superficial embodiment of obsessions. As a cultivator's realm gets higher and higher, the threshold of the mental state becomes more and more difficult, and they begin to truly come into contact with the essence of obsessions. Finally, after passing the yang spirit stage, severing the good and evil corpses becomes the so-called unique secret method of Tao integration. In this process, it's just that the yang spirit stage is more specific and consistent with the embodiment of obsessions. At this stage, time and space become a Tao realm that you must master to be able to reach the upper realm. This is the uniqueness of time and space in becoming an immortal. It's precisely because of the uniqueness of time and space in this period that if you want to kill a cultivator at the yang spirit stage, you must kill their 3 lives. It sounds very profound and makes you think that yang spirit perfected lords are amazing. In fact, in a cultivator's life of cultivation, severing obsessions has always been in progress. It's just that at the yang spirit stage, obsessions are the nature of time and space, the 3 lives. Lu Xiaoyi stood up and bowed deeply. These things couldn't be talked about in books, and they couldn't be kept. In fact, they were the deepest insights of a top old yang spirit for thousands of years. Bai Mei's gift was really heavy. If it were someone else, how could they tell you these things? Go figure it out yourself for thousands of years. The white-browed elder accepted his bow calmly, because he deserved it. Ever since he first saw this little guy on the heaven and earth chessboard, he had given him a very amazing feeling. It wasn't an external killing intent, but something inside that left a deep impression. For hundreds of years, he had been secretly observing him. What made him depressed was that every step he took was not within his expectations. Yet, he could achieve his goal to the greatest extent. Thus, he knew that this was a person he could never control. Was it erasure or investment? It was needless to say for Taoists. The key was that if the skin didn't exist, how could the hair attach to it? If the 5 rings that push down morality really collapsed, how could he, Zhou Xian, survive alone? They would either go to glory together or go to destruction together. Therefore, it was his responsibility to help this little guy stand up as soon as possible. He could feel that this little guy would play a role in the great changes of the world in the future. This was the reason why Taoists existed for so long. Chapter 1291. This is just a theory. It can't be confirmed that a person's past life doesn't exist. In the future, such disputes will continue without end. But in my thousands of years of life, I've seen reincarnations, but I don't know who transmigrated to the past, much less the future. I only believe in what I can see. Bame glanced at him and saw that the other party didn't move. He glared again, and Lu Xiaoyi hurriedly began to show off his clumsy tea skills. After taking a sip of the inferior tea, the white brows did not nitpick. A true Taoist actually had a hobby of cultivating disciples, especially when their disciples had the possibility of surpassing them and challenging goals that they could never reach. They also had an indescribable sense of accomplishment. Using the thinking of mortals, if I can't do it, my son will do it. If my son can't do it, my grandson will do it. Sooner or later, he will do it. This is the origin and changes of the 3 lives. You still have to figure out what comes after. Everyone's view of the 3 lives is different. There's no need to force it. How do you view the 3 lives? This is the most important thing in the application of the 3 lives. Looking at the 3 lives is malicious in the cultivation world. It can't be because we're good or because I like you. Fine, I'll look at your past life and future life. Looking at the 3 lives is to kill the 3 lives. You can't rely on luck. This is the iron law of the cultivation world. Bame pointed at him. Especially you swordsmen. Mortals also have 3 lives. It's just that the 3 lives of mortals are too complicated. With countless lives entangled, they don't have the ability to sort them out. Therefore, cultivators may be able to look at the 3 lives of other cultivators, but they may not be able to look at the 3 lives of mortals. This is also the wonder of cultivation. For mistreatment, mortals and immortals are the same. They can't look at the 3 lives. This is a process. As cultivators step onto the path of Tao, they gradually improve themselves. At the same time, the depths of their spirituality gradually become crystal clear. Only then will the 3 lives become clear. From the chaos of mortals to the beginning of foundation establishment, Jindan will begin to divide. Yuan-Ying will become traceable, and the Yin primordial spirit will begin to appear. Only when cultivators at the Yang spirit stage begin to come into contact with the uniqueness of time and space, then the 3 lives will be severed. It's equivalent to having 2 lives at all times. Lu Xiaoyi said with a smile, I thought that everyone had 3 lives to cut, but I didn't expect that only the sun god was like this. White Brow snorted. In ancient times, there was a killing technique that specialized in killing the past and future lives of the Yin God's primordial spirit. In fact, it was to sever one's Tao path. Sever your past, sever your foundation, sever your afterlife, and sever your future. But this method was like taking off one's pants to vent. With so much effort, couldn't you just directly kill him in the real world? Such orthodoxies were specially designed for orthodoxies with limited offensive capabilities in the present world. They could not slay the current you, so they could only rely on their superior ability to see through 3 lifetimes to slay the past and future. That's why I said that in the cultivation world, as long as someone sees your past and future, don't think too much about it. Just fight back, because this person is very likely to have the goal of severing your Tao path. Lu Xiaoyi understood what white brows meant. There were such cultivators. Because of their orthodoxies, their combat ability in face-to-face combat was weak. They lacked the ability to attack, so they found some indirect methods. For example, if they couldn't sever your present, they would sever your past and future to sever your Tao path. Senior brother, Yang Spirit Perfected Monarch isn't afraid of severing the past and future. As long as the three lives aren't severed at the same time, why would the Aeon God's primordial spirit be afraid of severing the past and future? Can't this kind of severing be restored in the real world? What's the point? White Brows explained, that's why I said this is an ancient killing technique. It's basically impossible to see it now. The Yang spirit's three lifetimes are transparent and complement each other, so it can only be destroyed by severing them together. The primordial spirit and Aeon spirit are not as transparent and can't support each other. So if it's severed and can't be restored. However, this kind of severing technique is extremely complicated and time-consuming. It also has high requirements for the cultivator. If you're obsessed with it, the opponent will be unreasonable and directly attack you in the real world. Your methods will be in vain. With the progress of the cultivation world, this kind of killing technique will gradually become obsolete. Wasting half a day will only harm the opponent's future. Who knows what will happen hundreds or thousands of years later? It's too much of a drag. You can't sever it cleanly, and when you do, you have to risk being severed in the real world. It's too useless, so gradually no one practiced it. In our Zhou, the primeval cave was very good at this kind of killing technique in history. However, I don't know if there are still people practicing it now. That's why I said, if anyone looks at your three lifetimes, don't be courteous, just kill them. To put it bluntly, it was only when a cultivator was in the Yang spirit stage that the three lifetimes were transparent and distinguishable. Before that, it was all jumbled up and blurry. The lower the realm, the more so, until it was completely indistinguishable when a mortal. Therefore, it wasn't very practical. However, it was precisely because of this ancient technique that all cultivators were in danger. If anyone dared to look at the three lifetimes, they would immediately be severed in the real world. The three lifetimes are divided into primary and secondary. This isn't an illusion, but a real existence. The past is very important, but no matter how important it is, can you live in the past? It's just a series of footprints. It can provide you with material to reflect in the real world, but you can't go back. As for the future, it's a kind of ideal, a kind of belief, a kind of vision. It exists in the projection of every cultivator's own plans in the future. It's illusory, unreal. When we talk about severing the three lifetimes, in reality, severing the past is denying your past. Severing the future is overturning your own plans on the path of Tao. If a person's past is not recognized, and he has no hope for the future, if he were to sever the real world, his Tao traces would be annihilated. Only then would he be truly dead. This is the core concept of the current self, the ego, and the superego. Bai Mei's tone became heavier. My suggestion is not to rashly try to look at the three lifetimes of others at the Aeon spirit stage. It will bring you completely unnecessary trouble. Only after we reach the Yang spirit stage do we begin to try the killing technique of three lifetimes in battle. We fumble about step by step, afraid that we'll take the wrong path. Your sword vein orthodoxy is definitely more radical. However, my opinion is still not to rashly provoke the Yang spirit. If you're not careful, you won't be able to escape. The Yang spirit can die countless times, but can you? You only have one life. Say what you're at. Don't try to be brave, and don't think of crossing realms to kill for food. If I really kicked the bucket, wouldn't all my investments be for naught? This was the truth, and also the experience of someone who had been through it. For a normal perfected Lord cultivator, the probability of encountering a Yang spirit perfected Lord was extremely low. As long as they lay low, they would be able to muddle through. However, this swordsman was too much of a troublemaker. He was not the same as a normal cultivator. He was still hoping that this guy would give him a surprise when the world changed. Chapter 1292. In the dead of the night, Lu Xiaoyi flipped open the Heavenly Heart Book's killing technique of three lifetimes. It was called the Three Lifetimes Killing Calamity. There was a sentence written clearly on it. The advantage of a swordsman is not to see through the three lifetimes. In this aspect, the sword vein can never compare to Taoism and Buddhism. The advantage of a swordsman is in the present world. Can't see through the past? No problem, I'll kill you now. Can't see through the future? No problem, I'll kill you now. I'll kill you until you panic, until you have nothing left to live for. I'll kill you until you give yourself away, until you doubt your life. In the end, I'll cut down your 3 lives mirror. Just like that, I'll kill you in 1 strike. Withdrawal. Sanshin. He knew that Sanshin was an outstanding swordsman of the older generation of Xianyuan sword sect. He was a half-immortal, but there was no news of him after that. This old man was famous before Crow Ancestor. Xianyuan was under his control for a period of time, more than 1,000 years. This included the period of the famous expedition against Sirius. It could be said that he was a benchmark figure in Xianyuan. This sentence was exactly what he wanted. I'll compare to the present. Can't compare to the past or the future. What's the use of seeing through my past and future? If you can't kill me now, you'll never be able to kill me. Old Bai Mei's origin wasn't wrong, but that was from the perspective of a spell cultivator. He, on the other hand, was a swordsman. There was one thing that old Bai Mei would never understand. The sharpness of a swordsman was that they would never run away from their opponents. Instead, the more difficult it was, the more they would attack. Lu Xiaoyi didn't have such a mindset. He couldn't help himself. He kept moving forward and couldn't stop. His life in carefree travel didn't last long. When he felt that time was tight, God's reaction would be to make him even more nervous. Just like when he was bored, he would make you even more bored. 2 years later, Che Xie found Lu Xiaoyi, who was immersed in the sea of knowledge. He had a strange expression on his face. Swordmaster, there's a letter. I don't know if it's real or fake. Only you can judge it for yourself. Che Xie handed over a very strange-looking jade slip. It was not the texture of a jade slip, but a flying swallow engraved on the jade slip. With a glance, Lu Xiaoyi was also a little surprised. This is blackmail? You're messing with us? Che Xie didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but his responsibility was to explain things clearly. Fian is a person's nickname. It could also be said to be the name of a bandit organization. In recent years, the universe had become more and more restless. Not only was the competition for Spiritium becoming more and more intense, even if one were to walk through the universe, they would often encounter small groups of robbers for a living. Among them, there were all sorts of backgrounds, and no one knew the exact details. They all had their own style of doing things. Some were still considered to abide by the rules of the universe, but there were also those who were extremely vicious and committed all sorts of crimes. Among these groups, the one with the symbol Fian was the most famous one. They were ruthless and merciless. Not only did they rob, but they also kidnapped and hid the victims. They openly demanded ransom from the sects behind the victims, and if they refused to pay, they would kill the hostages without hesitation. At first, they only committed crimes in the regions near Zhouxian. Later, they developed to the point where they didn't even let the cultivators in Zhouxian go. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. What? No one did anything about it. Che Xie smiled bitterly. They're very cunning. They wouldn't attack the 9 upper sects, but the 3,000 heterodox sects in Zhouxian. There were also small forces in Zhouxian and other victim orthodoxies who tried to kill them, but the result was very tragic. The hostages were all killed, and the people who tried to kill them also returned in defeat. Those who came back said that these criminals were very tough. Although there weren't many of them, they were all late Yuanying and perfected lords. Especially the few leaders, their strength was unfathomable. The universe was vast, and it was impossible to pinpoint their exact location. It was impossible to gather people to kill them. If there were only a few people, I think there's something strange about this jade scroll. I don't know who threw it in, but the name of the shaking shadow realm cultivator is at the top. The aura inside is a little unfamiliar, so it's hard to determine who it is. Lu Xiaoyi glanced at the jade scroll again. It was a very simple sentence. The great Tao has collapsed, and the universe has changed. Chatting with a noble friend, and spiritual opportunity continues. At the end, there were 2 auras of cultivators. They formed 2 balls of purple light. One ball had 700 points, The other had 800 points. Obviously, this was how much the ransom was. One was 700 purple light, and the other was 800 purple light. The unfamiliar aura Xie was talking about was that these two auras did not belong to the Yuanying perfected lords of the shaking shadow realm. This was also what he was worried about when he received the flying swallow jade. His brothers had gone to the universe to look for people and returned. They were afraid that they would bump into these robbers and become hostages. Fortunately, these two auras were unfamiliar, so he thought of the Swordmaster. The Swordmaster had the most friends in the universe, right? The proof of a kidnapping in the cultivation world was, of course, not just a signature, an item usually left behind an aura. It was the most authentic and trustworthy. Lu Xiaoyi obviously knew who these two auras belonged to, but there was no need to tell Xie. This was his personal matter. What he was interested in was, why are the ransom demanded by the robbers different? Xie was also having a headache. Swordmaster, the price of flying swallow jade has been relatively stable over the years. Normally, Yuanying is 500 purple light, and perfected lords are 2,000 purple light. However, I have never heard of anyone asking for 7 or 800 purple light. Why do you know them? Lu Xiaoyi smiled bitterly. I know them. However, I have nothing to do with the shaking shadow realm. I can deal with them myself. It's not a big deal. Xie did not say much. In the sword vein, the Swordmaster's move was the highest move. These flying swallow jade bandits were in for a bad time. He looked at Xie and suddenly remembered something. He took out a storage ring. There are 10,000 purple light in here. Take it. 3,000 is for your own use. 7,000 can be used to help those who are in trouble. I have been alone for the past few years and forgot to leave some money for you guys. Xie did not take it. He understood what the Swordmaster meant. Swordmaster, over the past few years, every time my brothers went out, they would bring me some spirit vigor. Actually, I don't lack it. Lu Xiaoyi waved his hand. They are theirs, and I am mine. How can we mix them up? Xie, after this is over, you have to pay attention to your cultivation. We of the shaking shadow realm do not lack fighters, but we do lack people who can be down to earth and conscientious in their daily lives. In the future, when we have more people, it will be awkward for you to speak as a Yuanying. Remember, swordsman, you should always put your own strength first. In any case, these spirit vigor came easily to me. Perhaps this time when I go out to rob, save people, I will be able to gain some more. Xie thought for a moment, then silently accepted it. The Swordmaster might have come easily, but he also knew that with the Swordmaster's temper, he would definitely not go out and harvest them one by one. That would definitely be a scam, just like this time's flying swallow jade bandits. However, whether it was easy or not was the Swordmaster's problem. Accepting it himself was another matter, but did not matter. In any case, he had already decided to devote his life to the sword vein. What was there to be pretentious about? He was very clear about his cultivation level. In fact, he was indeed in an awkward position when it came to spirit vigor. His brothers had brought him spirit vigor every time, but most of them did not have enough for themselves. How much could they give away? These friendships, it was enough to remember. There was no need to say too much. Chapter 1293. After sending Xie away, Lu Xiaoyi picked up the flying swallow jade slip. He didn't take it seriously. A group of thieves was just a target for him to test his sword. He was worried that he couldn't find a chance to test his sword after it was modified by the crow ancestor. He didn't expect that someone would show up. Walking out of the cave, he had a hunch that he wouldn't come back here for a long time. He was a little reluctant to leave. A cultivator's journey was to travel across the universe. It was also to ask the masters at the mountain gate and tease senior sister. It was moonlight. Lu Xiaoyi wanted to say hello to senior sister. Just like when he was with Yin Chun in the fifth ring, there was only a touch of warmth. As time passed, it slowly became mellow, more lasting, and more memorable. The next time they met, the universe would be in turmoil. He hoped that everyone would be safe and have a place to return to forever. A moment later, a figure flashed across the sky in a hurry. Behind him was a beautiful figure with a sword in her hand. A cultivator looked up and felt warm water dripping on his face. There was still a trace of fragrance left. In a quiet room on Xiaoyao Mountain, Bai Mei raised his head, and a smile appeared on his perpetually serious face. It was great to be young, but how long can you stay so young? Then he fell into silence. Lu Xiaoyi pierced through the universe, laughing heartily as he rushed into the void. At this moment, his body and mind had returned to their peak in joy. This was a great era, and he was destined to be pushed into the water. He was commonly known as the Tide Maker. On the back of the jade slip, there was a simple star map. Looking at the position of the star map, it should be outside the 3 universes. According to his speed, it would take him about a year and a half. Time was a little tight. He still had things to do. He gave the sword cultivators a time limit of 7 years, and 2 years had already passed in the free and unrestrained wanderer. Therefore, when he checked the star map again, he was lucky that there was a marker that was not far away from the predetermined location. It could be used. 3 months later, Lu Xiaoyi was close to the designated location of the robbers. He didn't care that this might attract the robbers' attention. He was cautious because he came too fast. When it comes to saving a hostage, no matter how fast you are, you can't be faster than the other party's thoughts. So, the most important thing is to let the kidnapper feel that you don't care about the hostage, instead of allowing others to grab hold of his weakness and pinch him flat. As for hostages, in the cultivation world, life and death were very normal. As a friend of Lu Xiaoyi, he had to understand this point. Now that he had thought things through, he decided to act decisively. He flashed through the area and immediately sensed 2 vague auras that formed a triangular formation. Walking a little closer, he discovered that the 2 of them were gathering spirit machines. Gathering spirit machines at the trading site? Would a slightly more cautious interstellar pirates choose such a place? Needless to say, he was definitely a sentry who was here to observe the situation. He wanted to see if there was a large group of people or if there was a powerful ambush. In any case, he was here to harvest spirit and didn't provoke anyone. What could he do to him? Lu Xiaoyi didn't hesitate. In an instant, he pounced forward and slashed with his sword. That cultivator was a peak Yuanying. When he first saw the swordsman perfected monarch, he was very afraid, but he couldn't run away. After a few hits, he realized that this swordsman perfected monarch was only SOSO. It seemed like he could defend himself. Thus, he pretended to yell with his divine sense. "You thief! Why are you hitting me for no reason? There's a lot of spirit machines here. I didn't chase you away even though I came first, but you came later and tried to snatch them from me. Is there such a tyrannical and unruly person in the universe?" As soon as he shouted, the other nascent soul cultivator from the pincer horn also flew over and tried to persuade him. There are countless spirit machines in the universe. Why fight over them? Let me be the mediator. This martial uncle. Before he could finish speaking, a sword came slashing at his head. He didn't think much of it. If his companion could block it, then their strength was similar. Of course, it wouldn't be a problem. But he didn't expect that just as he raised his protective artifact, the flying sword had already split him into 2. Following that, a huge hole was pierced through his main meridian under his abdomen. Lu Xiaoyi didn't even turn around. Another sword light attacked the Yuanying. How could the Yuanying not understand that this swordsman perfected monarch was just pretending to be weak to lure his companion over? If he wanted to run now, there was no road to heaven and no door to hell. Throwing the 2 half-dead cultivators together, Lu Xiaoyi didn't even look at them. "Take out all your spirit machines. This is robbery." The 2 Yuanying wanted to cry, but no tears came out. You're a perfected monarch swordsman, yet you're robbing 2 little Yuanying? And you're so heavy-handed. Who knows if there will be any repercussions, or if it will affect your future path. But their current situation wasn't suitable for them to think too much. Everything happened too quickly, too suddenly. Just as they were about to think, they were tormented by the fact that their lives were hanging by a thread. So what if it was a robbery? The most important thing was to preserve their lives. Thus, they took out all their spirit machines from their storage rings. They didn't dare to hide anything. The universe hadn't been peaceful these past few years, and there were all kinds of lunatics. They were meat on someone's chopping block, and now was not the time to play tricks. After taking out all their spirit machines, before they could say anything, the swordsman perfected monarch shot out 2 more sword lights. The 2 didn't even have the chance to dodge. They could only watch as the flying swords entered their bodies, thinking that their lives were over. But they didn't expect that the 2 swords would remain hidden after entering their bodies. They only heard the swordsman casually say, "1 year later, the swords will explode. Even the gods won't save you. Your spirit machines are too little, too little. Go back and find your friends in your sect to send some more to me. Remember, I'll only wait for 1 year." A nascent soul cultivator cried out in grievance, "Senior, we're in the middle of nowhere. Where do you expect us to find the nearest realm?" The other Yuaning also had a long face. "Senior, it's fine that you're here to harvest spirit machines. We're not as skilled as you to snatch our harvest, but you're so unforgiving." Lu Xiaoyi sat down in the air. "I'm indeed here to harvest spirit machines, but I don't harvest from the void. I like to harvest from people's bodies." Scram! The 2 Yuaning were helpless. They left sorrowfully, not knowing what to do. Was the swords really going to explode in a year? Was the swordsman really going to wait here for a year? What was his goal? There were countless problems plaguing them. One of the Yuaning's eyes turned malicious. "This person is letting us go, so he must have a plan. But we can't just go back like this. Our lives are small, but it'll be a big deal if we attract a powerful enemy. Boss has treated us well, so we can't break the code of brotherhood." The other Yuaning was equally fierce. "How can I not know what you're talking about? But we can't just throw our lives away here and not do anything, right? Why don't we circle around a few more times before going back?" The first Yuaning shook his head. "That's not right. He's a perfected lord. He can use a secret technique to follow us. What's the point of circling around a few more times?" The other said, "We can't do this and we can't do that. Why don't you give us a good idea? Don't tell me we're just going to stay here and die." The first Yuaning made up his mind. "How about this, you go back. Be alert on the way back. Pay attention to whether there's anyone following behind you. I'll stay here and keep an eye on him. If he does anything strange, I'll release a death letter." Chapter 1294. Lu Xiaoyi didn't move at all. He just stayed where he was, pondering over his swordsmanship. He naturally had his reasons for doing so. The first step was to catch them off guard. That was a primer. It wasn't about the spiritual opportunity, but about their desire for revenge. He could also force them to lead the way. But these 2 bandits weren't as weak as they appear to be. People like them who were used to doing business without capital in the universe were the most ferocious, but their so-called loyalty couldn't be underestimated. If he used force, it might backfire. Either he forced them to their deaths or led them around the universe. How would he have the time to play this game with them? Only by letting them go could he attract the revenge of the bandits. In this kind of void universe, he wasn't afraid of being besieged. The most important thing for a bandit group was to maintain an aura that would kill anyone who stood in their way. Although the camaraderie in a group was laughable to cultivators, it was the foundation that had to be maintained. A bandit group that was beaten up and still wanted to extort spiritual opportunity was intolerable. By the time they arrived, they would have beaten them into submission. Naturally, everything would be resolved. Of course, if the other party wanted to kill the hostages and fight to the death, he would only kill these people to avenge the other 2. It wasn't that he was ruthless. It was because if they really wanted to kill him secretly, he wouldn't be able to save them in time. So he could only bet on who would be soft in the end. You don't care? I don't care either. Then let's see who really cares in the end. This was his rescue method. They were all here to snatch resources, not because of any beliefs. He didn't believe that such a bandit group would give up their interests for integrity in the end. Of course, he knew that there was a bandit watching him from afar. Did he think that he wouldn't know because he had restrained his aura? Since this person stayed here, the bandits would definitely come. It was a matter of time. 1 year was his judgment. He didn't dare to say that the bandits' lair was within a year's distance, but the place where they stopped for a short time definitely wouldn't be too far away. If you put it too far away, just the time to take hostages would take a few years. Wasn't that too free? What if he made a wrong judgment? He wasn't the one who would die. He was thinking about his own swordsmanship. After carefully thinking about the words left by the three Qins in Xinyuan, he finally made his decision to follow good advice. Having one's own swordsmanship philosophy didn't mean that one had to overturn the experience of all the predecessors. Learning from each other's strengths to make up for one's weaknesses was the way for smart people to improve. He even wanted to learn from white-browed sword immortal. How could he give up on his sword vein, which was the most accomplished half-immortal sword immortal? Therefore, he had to learn the Crow ancestors' sword Dao steel. He also wanted to learn the three Qin half-immortals techniques. Moreover, the concept of the three Qins was really to his liking. This was the reason why he needed to change his way of thinking. For the time being, he would only study the three lives theory and not put it into practice. I should focus on increasing my attack power in the modern world. He had to try his best to tap into the potential of his Yin master. He had the confidence. This was because he was able to suppress Yuanying. There was no reason why a Yin master would not be able to suppress an essence soul perfected lord. Now that he had the help of the Crow ancestor, he would have to try and see if he could suppress the sun god after completing his sword cultivation on the sword Dao steel. I won't kill you for 3 lifetimes, but I'll kill you now. There's no end to it. I'll chop you to death. Originally, he had wanted to learn the 3 lives realm after learning the foundation realm from the sword Dao steel. This was to deal with the possibility of facing the sun god in the future. But now, he knew that he was too impatient. He had to start from the basics and build a good foundation step by step. In fact, the Crow ancestor had already started what he should do in the sword Dao steel. Sometimes, he would think that his performance in the foundation realm was really worse than the Crow ancestors. Not necessarily. Although both of them suppressed their cultivation to the foundation establishment realm, their cultivation could be suppressed, but their experience and insight could not be suppressed. The Crow ancestors' strength in the foundation realm in the sword Dao steel was actually the strength of an 8,000-year-old foundation establishment realm expert. And he had only been there for a short 1,000 years. From his point of view, he could be proud, right? In the new realm, he began to slowly find his direction. Half a year later, in the distance, there began to be a faint aura disturbance. Lu Xiaoyi knew that this was an outpost observing this space to see if there was a large army lying in ambush. Very cautious, he did not move. If he moved too early, it would be easy to alarm the other party. In this way, he waited for another month. When the aura gathered from all directions, he knew that the bandits had eaten a pill of reassurance and were ready to punish him. There were a total of 36 auras. What was surprising was that there were 12 perfected cultivators and 3 primordial spirits. What kind of bandit group could gather so many cultivators? How could they rely on robbery to maintain such a large group? There was no way to divide the spiritual opportunity. He vaguely realized that things might not be that simple. But to him, the nature of the situation had not changed. Because there was no sun god. The leader of the primordial spirits said, "The great universe, you hurt someone for a mere spirit stone. What else do you have to say now?" He did not say his name. The bandits did not like this. If not for this Taoist's terrifying calmness, he would have the urge to quickly kill this person. Moreover, the sword chi that this person channeled into his companion's body was indeed very difficult to resolve. Although he was not sure if it would flare up a year later, it was inevitable. If it was within their capabilities, they must not abandon their companions. Even if they did not agree, they had to give it a try. Otherwise, it would be difficult to lead the group. Lu Xiaoyi did not say much. He only threw an item in his hand. It was the most common jade scroll in the cultivation world. However, the flying swallow symbol on it was especially eye-catching. The primordial spirit perfected cultivator's gaze turned cold. He really did not expect this person to be here to collect the ticket. This was a little too fast. You're here to pay the ransom? Using this method? Lu Xiaoyi was expressionless. I don't have the habit of paying ransoms. I only have the habit of collecting ransoms. Since you want 1,500 purple purity and made me come all the way here, it's not too much for me to double it, right? Take 3,000 purple purity and bring the person to me. I'll leave immediately. The primordial spirit perfected cultivator could not help but laugh. This was probably crazy. Why do you have to say this? Even if the 9 upper sects of the Zhou Xian upper realm were here, they would not dare to speak to us like this. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Because I'm a swordsman. The primordial spirit laughed. In these dozens of universes, it's not up to the sword vein to set the rules. Lu Xiaoyi stretched out his fist and pointed his thumb at himself. Today, starting from me, I'll set the rules for all of you. Without wasting any more words, he leaped and disappeared. The pirates did not expect this person to make the first move. However, they were also very experienced. They spread out in all directions. At this moment, a Tao dissipation celestial phenomenon had already risen. In the beginning, he did not kill anyone because he needed them to return and report. Now, he killed because, as someone who came from the Pirate Star, he knew all too well what this so-called pirate group was. There was no such thing as harming one's own comrades and risking one's life. In other words, their so-called risking one's life had a bottom line. They were not a real sect with 10,000 years of foundation and nurturing. Killing their bottom line was the only way to solve the problem. Chapter 1295. From the very beginning, the battle was filled with blood. The swordsman was like the Grim Reaper, flashing between the dozens of bandits. This was a battle where man and sword were separated from each other. At least, that was how the bandits saw it. The sword river was forever hanging in the sky, with millions of sword lights surging endlessly, changing into different forms at any time. It could be a giant dragon, a sea of swords, a mountain barrier, or scattered stars. The one who cooperated with them was the swordsman himself. He could always perfectly coordinate with the millions of sword lights. You wouldn't know where he was, because the sword lights in the sky were his best cover. The only thing you knew was where the sword lights were. But with millions of them, what difference did it make whether you knew it or not? Although they seemed to be separated, they were actually closely connected. The man was controlling the sword, and the sword was covering the man. However, this kind of cover was no longer a simple defensive cover, but a blurred reflection between the sword lights and the man. The entire space was enveloped by the sword lights, turning into a world of swords. The swordsman was constantly changing positions, just like how the Blood River Taoist was in his own blood river. The current swordsman had transformed into a sword light, disappearing into the millions of sword lights. There was no way to fight this battle. The perfected cultivators in the group of bandits used all kinds of strange techniques to try and stop the river of sword chi from surging forward. However, under the unparalleled sharpness of the river of sword chi, no spells, barriers, or Taoist items could stop it. It was like dozens of ordinary people trying to restrain a cheetah with their bare hands. The Tao dispelling heavenly phenomenon had never stopped since the beginning of the battle. Most of them were nascent soul stage cultivators. One after another, they fell to the omnipresent sword light. They couldn't even find an opponent, and they didn't know what to do. They could only attack anything that approached them like headless flies in the dazzling river of swords. Not only did they attack the sword light, but they also attacked their companions. After being improved by Crow Barber, the sword manipulation began to show a brand new form. Not only did it manipulate the sword, but it also manipulated the man. This was the first stage of becoming one with the sword. There was no fixed pattern, and he could do whatever he wanted at any time. He wouldn't even attack the opponent that he should attack the most. It wasn't based on the threat level, but purely on who he disliked. Those with thick eyebrows and big eyes. Those with gaudy clothes. Those with foul mouths. Those with sneaky actions. Sprinkling the heavens and earth. In the blink of an eye, 11 Yuanian cultivators and 2 true monarchs of Masters had been killed. The essence soul perfected lord leading the group shouted, Yuan, get out of the way. Let the martial uncles do it. Martial uncle? This was not a bandit group. It was a sect-like force. But at this point, there was no longer any possibility for him to hold back. He didn't want to slow down. The primordial spirit strategy was very effective. Once the number of people decreased, there were only 10 supremes left. Each of them occupied an area to suppress him from afar, leaving only 3 primordial spirits to tangle with him. This was the best way to deal with a mobile player. Under such circumstances, Lu Xiaoyi would not fight them head-on. Instead, he retracted his sword river and moved along with his sword. He rushed past a corner guarded by a Yin deity and directly escaped. Seeing that he was about to escape, how could the 10 perfected lords tolerate it? Each of them followed closely behind, but they didn't expect that in less than 10 breaths, the swordsman would pounce back brazenly. Once again, he and his sword were one, piercing through the main group of pursuers. One was intentional, the other was passive. There was no way for either of them to dodge. Once they collided, it was another life and death battle that lasted for several breaths of time. After the clash, the swordsman was slightly injured and another Yin master died on the spot. Then he continued to run. The 2 Yuan cultivators wanted to help the martial uncles to intercept him, but they were like mantises trying to stop a chariot. The perfected lords of the bandit group turned around and gave chase. Just as they took a step forward, the swordsmen pounced back brazenly. It was obvious that they were gambling on licking blood from their blades in the span of a few breaths. More importantly, they couldn't win against him. After another Yin god died, there were only 8 perfected sovereigns left in their pursuit. The leader stopped everyone and glared at the swordsman. What are you going to do? Lu Xiaoyi licked his lips and took out a stick of sugar-coated haws. It had been a few hundred years since he last licked this thing. How nostalgic. Let them go. 3,000 purple purity. In the future, if anyone dares to lay their hands on the sword vein in the nearby universe, I'll make sure they'll never have peace. How impressive. How capable. Aren't you afraid that I'll take your friends' lives and break up with them? Lu Xiaoyi smiled indifferently. Whatever. Take their lives or destroy their foundations. There's no need to send them back. Leave them in the universe and let them be eaten by the void beasts. I'll even save money on coffins. The 3 perfected lords were silent for a moment. They were now faced with a difficult choice. Besieging and killing this swordsman was an impossible task. They were all veterans of the universe and could clearly see the difference in strength. The situation was obvious. In a one-on-one fight, none of them, including the 3 perfected lords, were his match. The worst thing was that besieging and killing someone like him was completely ineffective. What the universe was most afraid of was this kind of powerful desperados. He was not like an army of cultivators, who always had signs to follow when they came and went. They could take the initiative to respond whether they fought or left. However, such a person was a loner. It was very difficult to figure out his path and thoughts. He was also not stingy. If you were staying by him for years or decades, what would you do if he used human heads to practice his swordsmanship here? Stop carrying out the plan? Stop doing the mission? Stop doing business? Everyone was going to return to their own homes and find their own mothers? Worrisome. Who would have thought that 2 ordinary and unremarkable pawns would attract such a fierce god? They struggled for a moment. After all, the bigger picture was more important. Moreover, the great master was not here. They could not take out all their assets just to vent their anger. Fellow Taoist, what's your name? We have to know who exactly defeated us today. Zhou Xian's carefree, wandering single ear, also known as Sword Master Yaoying. You can find me anytime, anywhere. The perfected lords looked at each other and sighed. How did they provoke such a big bug? Zhou Xian's diplomatic mission to Heaven's Choice was a major event. Not only were the people of Zhou Xian watching, but also the various realms of the surrounding dozens of universes. They also had traveling cultivators in Heaven's Choice, so they had eyes and ears. As long as it was a power with a bit of self-awareness, who wouldn't know the general situation of the universe? Who wouldn't care about Heaven's Choice? As soon as the results of Echo Valley came out, the name of carefree, wandering, single ear spread back to Zhou Xian without waiting for the diplomatic mission to return. Everyone knew that a remarkable swordsman had appeared in Zhou Xian. With his own strength, he had turned the tide of Heaven's Choice. Now, this person had become a perfected lord. He was truly a person with a reputation like a tree's shadow. He was even more fierce and tyrannical than the legends. If one was not a sun god, one could forget about restraining such a person. Humans were always looking for excuses, reasons, and excuses for themselves. It was hard to swallow the anger of a nobody, but what if it was a well-known, fierce person in the universe? Perhaps they would be able to accept it psychologically. There were even some shameless people who would boast, "I met that fierce person in the universe, and guess what happened? After a great battle, I actually didn't die. As for those who died, who would think about him?" Chapter 1296. The primordial spirit was helpless. He was unwilling to lower his head, but in the cultivation world, if you don't lower your head, you won't live long. He sent a private message through his divine sense. We can let him go. We can also not lay our hands on the wavering shadow sword vein. But we won't give you a single strand of Ziqing. Lu Xiaoyi took advantage of the situation and said, "Ziqing, it's just a joke. As the owner of the wavering shadow sword, I have the obligation to help both my friends and my disciples. This is a responsibility that can't be avoided. I'm very sorry for the deaths and injuries. But if I don't do this, I'm afraid it'll be an endless wrangling." The primordial spirit sighed. The news from Heaven's Choice was right. Not only did this single-eared sword vein kill people, he also knew how to be a person. He couldn't say that if you told us your name, we would naturally let him go. If this swordsman had told us his name, we would most likely have rejected him. Humans were like this. They had to experience everything personally. This world was full of illusions. Only pain wouldn't lie. Now that the pain was over, he felt more at ease. "I can't tell you my name. I'm very sorry, but we'll send him over quickly. I guarantee that he won't be hurt." Lu Xiaoyi nodded to express his understanding. The great Tao has collapsed, and the universe is in chaos. It's always better to be careful. Everyone and every force is looking for their own way out. You're doing this, and so is our sword vein. You're not Fian, right? Help me pass a message to him. In the universe, it's better to have more friends than enemies. When the time comes, he'll have extra help. Tell him that I'll be waiting for his visit. I hope that when the time comes, we can be honest with each other. The primordial spirit wanted to say that he was Fian, but under the sharpness of this swordsman, he felt that it was better to be honest. He didn't want to destroy the connection that he had painstakingly established, even if the memories of this connection were painful. The sword vein was also a very powerful force, especially the sword vein that was led by such a person. "I will, but I don't know what Yin Jun can talk to you about when we're strangers." Lu Xiaoyi smiled enigmatically. "There must be. In the past, we might not have crossed paths again, but in this era, we will definitely meet again." Greeting him early could avoid a lot of trouble caused by misunderstandings. He would understand. Tell him that we're all on the same path, but we don't know if we're walking on the same path. Or is it on the way? The Essence Soul Perfected Lord was still arrogant. More than 10 of them had been killed. This was the last bit of face he had left. Lu Xiaoyi did not mind at all. "I can't guarantee that Fei Yin Jun will definitely meet you, but I promise to deliver your message. By the way, if Fei Yin Jun was here, the outcome of this battle might have been different." Lu Xiaoyi didn't retort. It was just like a mortal who had been beaten up after losing a fight. "Wouldn't you allow the other party to say a few harsh words?" "I believe you. So, I'm looking forward to meeting him." It was a hint that they were not necessarily space pirates, and that they were doing this to cover up other purposes. As for what purpose? Under the current situation, it was impossible to escape from a fixed category. He didn't say that because he really cared about this space pirate organization or the platform behind it. The most direct purpose of wasting his breath was to ensure that the two hostages would not suffer any hidden harm before they were sent back. This was a very complicated psychological hint process. He was hinting that he might cross paths with Fei Yin-ju in the future. He was hinting that there was a possibility of cooperation in the future changes of the universe, so as to reduce the real harm caused to the other party by his gratuitous killing. He was making the other party focus on the future and ignore the present, using some illusory vision in exchange for the absolute safety of his two friends, leaving no future troubles. But he couldn't say these words out loud. If he said it out loud, he would be at a disadvantage. Of course, if there was really a day in the future when he could cross paths with the famous Fei Yin-jun, it would be an unexpected gain. Rescuing the hostages was a technical job. Fortunately, he was not unfamiliar with this since he was born in the universe's largest space pirate organization. From the beginning to the end, he did not show any concern for the two hostages. This was the key to a successful rescue. The surrounding space pirates slowly dispersed. Many of them were unwilling to give up, and their faces were full of hatred. They had suffered heavy losses and were sad about the death of their friends. It was very likely that they would do something irrational. This was actually the reason why he said a bunch of nonsense at the end. He had enough of worrying. There were only 2 primordial soul stage cultivators left. For months later, several auras approached quickly. Among them were a group of pirates, and 2 fellows whom he had not seen for a long time. Sun Xiaomao flew closer and stammered. As a palace's cat with aspirations, it had lost a lot of face this time. Lu Xiaoyi ignored it and only smiled at the primordial soul stage cultivator beside him. Thank you for taking care of this thing for me. Don't be fooled by its small size. It can eat a lot. I can't afford to feed it this spiritual opportunity. I thought I could get rid of this trouble, but it turned out to be a lucky one. What a pity. The primordial soul stage cultivator was disdainful. He could also see that this person did not mean what he said. Not only was his methods ruthless, but he was also very scheming. This kind of person could not be easily offended. Otherwise, there would be endless trouble. Senior brother, I'm innocent. Lu Xiaoyi glanced at it. It's good that you're innocent. Do you know how the word innocent is written? It's a rabbit taking the blame. This is your life. The elder ancestor had already predicted this. There was another illusory figure that came over. It was a spiritual body. It was a little weak and floated around, as if a gust of wind could blow it away. Lu Xiaoyi joked, "Isn't this Yudan? Why aren't you dead yet? It's normal for others to be caught, but it's not right for you to be caught like this." Yugu laughed dryly. Senior brother, the universe is too vast. There's no way for me to use my methods. There are no weaklings among the human cultivators who can come out into the void. I want to do it, but I'm powerless. Lu Xiaoyi cupped his fists and bade farewell to the 2 primordial soul stage perfected lords. When the ancients fought, there were those who became mortal enemies. There were also those who became friends after fighting. Tell Fei Yanjun that I hope we can have a good ending. In that case, we'll meet again in the future. The 2 primordial souls clasped their fists and left. This swordsman was placed in an extremely important position in their hearts. They did not know how their relationship would be in the future. They only hoped that they would not become mortal enemies. This person was too strange. Lu Xiaoyi led the spiritual body and the cat back slowly. Things were progressing smoothly. He still had a few years of free time. Since rescuing the hostages was going smoothly, he began to think about his other small goal. He had nothing to do anyway. He glanced at the 2 guys who were following behind him with drooping eyebrows and chuckled. Who can tell me, why is a kitten only worth 800 purple purity? Yugu, you're only worth 700 purple purity? Is there something special about this? Chapter 1297. Little Meow was a little embarrassed, but Yugu was very unconvinced. These guys are so snobbish. I haven't fully displayed my abilities yet. Little Meow is a little higher because they think that Little Meow can be a beast pet, but I can't. They say that I'm too complicated. Actually, the price tag for the two of us is much higher than the other people's 500 purple purity. Lu Xiaoyi smiled faintly. Oh, complicated? They're actually not wrong, right? Yugu was a little embarrassed. This involved a very secretive problem. When the three of them first came to Zhou Xian, Lu Xiaoyi and Qing Xian went on the heaven and earth chessboard, and he was interrogated by Bai Mei at the first moment. A Jin Dan in front of the sun god, no matter what form he took, was destined to not keep a secret. This was an unspeakable pain, and also the reason why Yugu was a little evasive over the years as the two humans' realms became higher and higher. When one's realm was high, some things could no longer be hidden from others. Lu Xiaoyi only nodded slightly, but then his tone softened. In the process of human cultivation, there are always countless helplessness. We have no choice but to accept reality. We can't resist, and we have no power to resist. I can understand, because if you put me and Qing Xian in your position, we also can't keep any secrets. But what I want to say is, don't become a habit of having no choice again and again just because you had no choice once. Now that our realms are high, our ability to resist certain things has also increased. So, in the end, we still have to have some perseverance. This way, we can be friends for a longer time. This time, it didn't affect the overall situation, but it doesn't mean that it will be the same next time. What exactly happened at that time, I don't want to ask, and you don't have to say either. Let's just wait and see. What do you think? Yugu wanted to explain, but after thinking about it, he also knew that there was no point in explaining. Senior Marshal Brother was right. Instead of explaining, it was better to just wait and see. He felt that he was still very lucky. At least these two friends had not been lost. When he was in danger, they would save him at the first moment. But how long could this friendship last? Some things still needed to be done. All these years, ever since he became Yuanying Soul Body, he had made friends with all kinds of people. He knew that among them, there were probably few who could be trusted, and there were many who had taken a fancy to his soul body Yuanying. Therefore, when he was in real danger, the first thing he thought and hoped for were his two friends in the space crack. He didn't want to abandon this friendship. Therefore, he also made the decision that he had been hesitating all this time. Senior Brother, I actually still want to go back. This bandit group is very strange. I don't understand it. Use soul bodies is you don't need to deliberately do anything to prove yourself. So groups is you don't need to do anything to prove yourself. This group of pirates is not simple, and their leader, Fei Yin, is not easy to deal with either. If your soul-seizing technique is still a half-baked Jin Dan, I don't think you should take the risk. Let me tell you first, if something happens again, no one will come to save you. The two of us won't stay in Zhou Xian. We don't have the time. Yugu insisted. Senior Marshal Brother, don't worry. I'm confident, and I've been planning this all this time. For a soul body like mine, the soul-seizing technique after becoming a nascent soul is different from when I was in Jindan. I have a few very special methods. I don't care if the opponent's cultivation is higher than mine. Moreover, I've already found my target long ago. When I was imprisoned, I had been in contact with him for many years. Now that he's been injured by you, it's almost impossible for anything to go wrong. Also, I'll be careful, especially with their leader. I won't take the initiative to ask about anything. Anyway, I don't have anything important to do in the universe, and I don't need spiritium. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. It's good that you have a plan. You know what you're doing, how confident you are, and whether you can control it. I won't stop you, because this is the path of a cultivator's own cultivation. There are dangers, but there are also opportunities. It's better than mingling in the world domain. If there's any news you can convey, you can send it back to Yaoing. As for Xiao Yao Yu and Tai Xian Zhong Huang, both of us aren't there, so don't go. Yugu had his own goal. Whether it was to prove his value, or because he was really interested, or because of some other reasons, it wasn't important. What was important was that everyone had to do something in the tide, so that they could really integrate into the tide and not be abandoned by the times. Looking at Yugu's gradually disappearing figure, Lu Xiaoyi turned his head and smiled. Xiao Miao, what happened to you? Were you taken from Miao Planet by someone, or did you fall down while walking at night? Sun Xiao Miao was a little embarrassed. I got lost while traveling through the universe. Now that everything on Miao Planet is on the right track, there's really no need for me to keep guarding that place. Senior brother, Miao Planet is too small, and there's not enough spiritual opportunity. Humans won't take a fancy to that kind of place, so if I'm not there, it might be safer. I want to go out and see the universe so that I won't regret it when I'm old. But I really don't have anywhere to go, so I want to go to Senior Brother Zhou to take a look. Well, I don't have a star map, so I flew in the wrong direction, bumped into them, and asked them for directions. I didn't suffer much because I'm not human, so I don't have any value. Lu Xiaoyi found it funny. This little kitten had too little experience outside, and her contact with humans was limited. If she didn't experience these things herself, others wouldn't be able to teach her. Why? Do you still want to go to Zhou now? I can give you a star map. Xiao Miao wanted to say something, but hesitated. Senior brother, you're not there, so there's no point for me to go. Lu Xiaoyi didn't mind. Then follow me. We'll go for a spin in the universe. When there's a fight, you run further away. A man and a cat began to wander in the universe. Although Xiao Miao didn't have much experience, cats weren't stupid. Looking at Senior Brother's actions in the past few months, he didn't collect spiritual energy, nor did he have a fixed direction. It really seemed like he was going for a spin, and he was going for a spin like a headless fly. Anyway, she couldn't see any pattern, so she tried to sound him out. Senior Brother, are you looking for something? If it's not important, you can tell me. Maybe Xiao Miao can help you? Lu Xiaoyi stared blankly for a moment. He was used to being alone. That was right. When it came to tracking, demonic beasts often had better intuition than humans. The way of heaven was fair. It had different endings for all living things. Things that were difficult for humans might not be difficult for demonic beasts. So he asked, Xiao Miao, do you know anything about the innate spiritual treasures in the nearby universe? Sun Xiao Miao perked up. I know. That damned old fogey once showed off to me. In the dozens of nearby universes, there's a total of 3 innate spiritual treasures. Zhou heaven and earth chessboard and a fixed space region's ruins of N's cave. N, the last one, is the mobile Taiposhi. Senior brother, you're not looking for Taiposhi, are you? Smart Xiao Miao. Chapter 1298. While leading Lu Xiaoyi through the universe, Sun Xiaomao explained, Lord Tai Pu has a habit of holding meetings to help the younger cultivators. It's not yuanying, but Jindan. Therefore, he likes to wander among the cultivation planets in the nearby universe and observe the cultivation situation of the planets. Lord Tai Pu never judges by the size of the planets, so he also paid attention to Miao Star. He also told me that if there is a good seedling, he can also bring Miao Star into Taiposhi. Unfortunately, my talent is limited. Jindan's strength is much weaker than other realms, so I have never been able to enter. It was precisely because I had communicated with Lord Tai Pu that I knew his general direction. Perhaps Lord Tai Pu purposely let me and the other lesser demons know. It's in this direction. I can't be wrong. There were many reasons why Lu Xiaoyi found Lord Tai Pu an innate spiritual treasure at this time. Firstly, he felt that this innate spiritual treasure was somewhat close to him. Although he couldn't be sure, he vaguely felt that he could rely on it. Secondly, Bai Mei told him that when it came to speed in the universe, if innate spiritual treasures said they were second, no one would dare to say they were first. It seemed that Ling Bao had a huge system in the universe, just like the express delivery in his previous life. Mobility was something that he valued very much, especially when it came to long-distance movement. After hundreds of years, he had long been disappointed with the path back to the 5 rings or the blue sky. Even if he found it, it would be a long process before he reached the half-immortal realm, even if it was in the negative space. Therefore, Bai Mei's seemingly casual chat gave him a shortcut. Of course, to a sun spirit like Bai Mei, it was really unintentional to not say anything, but he really didn't have the time to think about the hidden purpose behind it. Ling Bao was the only half-immortal race that was not called back in the disaster of the collapse of the Great Tao. This came from the entire cultivation world and the immortal court's recognition of their performance over millions of years. This was a real elite race, not as strict as the human race. Even high-end Archean beasts like Phoenix and Xianglu had their own small families, but Ling Bao didn't. Each of them was unique and didn't have the problem of inheritance, nor did they have the threat of establishing their own forces. They always existed in the world of cultivators as individuals, and they never participated in the conflicts between human beings and other intelligent species. Perhaps it was because of this feature that the world of cultivators in the mortal world needed such a balance and monitoring system. Therefore, both the congenital spiritual treasures and the acquired spiritual treasures, regardless of their level, became the only species in the universe that still had half-deities. They silently observed the changes in the universe and the suicidal actions of other species. According to the Old by May, there was a communication system among the spiritual treasures in the universe. What made Lu Xiaoyi curious was the function of this system. Obviously, it was not for the Bao, but for whom was it for? Ba Mei didn't say, but Lu Xiaoyi guessed that he didn't use it either. He didn't really want to go there to get anything. It was a system established by all the Ling Bao in the universe. Even half-immortals couldn't go there, so it was unrealistic for the low-ranking immortals to go there. Such a system was not something he could use, but he wouldn't get pregnant if he went there to take a look. Everyone had to have a dream. What if it came true? This was also the only feasible way for him to pass through so far before he really grew up. Unfortunately, the changes in the universe didn't wait for him, and he couldn't grow up slowly. Can I go there too? Sun Xiaomiao was looking forward to it. Lu Xiaoyi smiled and said, "Of course, even pigs can go in, let alone you." Sun Xiaomiao only took it as a joke, but she didn't know that this sentence was really not a joke. The last time she went in with Lu Xiaoyi wasn't a pig. A year later, they rushed to where Taiposhi was. Fortunately, the distance wasn't too far, or else Lu Xiaoyi might not have so much time. Even so, he couldn't stay in Taiposhi for more than 2 years, which was completely different from the last time. Last time, that idiot slept in there for a full 30 years. It was still the same as before, an ordinary little meteorite with no sense of existence. There were countless such things in the universe, just like a grain of sand on the beach. It was still the same as before. Taiposhi was willing to let them catch up, which meant that he didn't refuse. But Sun Xiaomiao's reaction was completely different from that of the silly pig. At that time, the silly pig advised her to say hello first, but Sun Xiaomiao's first reaction was, "Senior brother, how are we going to sneak in?" Lu Xiaoyi tricked it. Grandpa Taiposhi likes obedient and cute kittens the most. You can change back to your original form, act coquettishly in front of him, roll around, and show your belly. Maybe he'll let you in. All right, Sun Xiaomiao, are you a male or a female? For the first time, Sun Xiaomiao didn't answer her senior brother's question honestly. After being together for a long time, she also knew that her senior brother was also a playful person who liked to tease people the most. And tease cats too. She was a little embarrassed. "Senior brother, shouldn't you leave for a while?" Lu Xiaoyi laughed and turned around. Okay. Our Sun Xiaomiao also wants to save face. Can I turn around and not look?" As he turned around, he secretly took out a shadow recording stone, ready to record this little guy's unbearable behavior. Sun Xiaomiao saw her senior brother turn around and knew that this was meaningless to cultivators. But she couldn't let her senior brother leave her sight, right? She would get beaten up. She hesitated, half hidden, half transformed. First, a furry tail stretched out from her, but she was a little embarrassed and tried her best to clamp it. Then, hair began to grow on her face, and between her fingers and feet, sharp toes began to pop out. Then, she didn't continue to transform, because she saw her senior brother's shoulders trembling slightly. He was holding a stone in his palm and facing her. "Senior brother, you lied to me." Before she could transform back to her human form, Lu Xiaoyi had already kicked her but sent her flying towards the meteorite. She heard her senior brother's hearty laughter in her ears. "Oh, it's a rare breed with dual pupils. Son Xiaomiao, you even lied to your senior brother. You deserve this kick. One of the characteristics of demonic beasts was that their supernatural powers and abilities could often be expressed through their physical appearance. For example, in the cat race, the palace's maces usually had yellow eyes and black kernels. When the pupils contracted, they were round and not vertical. But Sun Xiaomiao's two eyes were blue and green. The blue eye was dual pupils. People in the mortal world were very superstitious. They believed that people with dual pupils would often have great wealth. But they didn't know what this situation meant when it happened to Sun Xiaomiao. Could be a very special, supernatural power. Chapter 1299. The man and the beast crashed into Taiposhi and found that the environment they were in was at the end of the changes in the universe of Taipu. In other words, it was very similar to the current universe environment, belonging to the same period. Everything was developing steadily and slowly heading toward a decline. It was as if, like the main world, it was also preparing to start a new era. The current period was also the strongest period of Lord Taipu's strength cycle. He had just entered the Sun Spirit realm and was still constantly strengthening. In this world, because the evolution of the real universe had to be completed in a few hundred years, everything progressed very quickly, as if the world's fast-forward button was pressed. Sun Xiaomao was very curious. Of course, she knew very well that such an opportunity was rare in her life. If she hadn't followed her senior brother, she would never have been able to enter this place. Therefore, she threw away her previous annoyance and wholeheartedly began her own comprehension. Fortunately, the cat race's comprehension was not like that of a fool who only knew how to sleep. Lu Xiaoyi didn't care too much about the changes in the universe here. 2 years' time was too short for him, so short that he didn't have time to comprehend it. This was his third time here. Unlike the previous 2 times, he had a personal purpose this time. Lord Taipu looked at the little fellow silently. His heart, which had never been happy or worried, began to ripple. Because he was in this universe, he was closer to nature than the ancient beasts and could better understand the changes in the universe. Seeing that the tree trunk he had once watered had become a small sapling and was getting closer and closer to his hope, how could he be calm? Innate spiritual treasures were born from the chaos of the universe. They were the existence closest to the universe. In terms of intuition, they had an innate advantage. Now, many of the complicated threads had become traceable, and many complicated changes were beginning to become clearer. From them, he saw the hope of breaking out of this damned cycle. What he had to do now was to control his own behavior. How could he do more without violating the spiritual treasure's code of conduct? How could he escape the eyes of the heavenly Tao? There were many restrictions. First, he couldn't ask. Second, he couldn't answer, or rather, he couldn't use words or any other direct methods. Finally, he couldn't interfere. He had to let the little fellow do as he wished. Even if there was a fire pit in front of him, he could only watch him fall in. Not to mention pulling him. He couldn't even shout to be careful. This was the rule of a spirit treasure. This was also the reason why the supreme cultivators of the other cultivation clans were taken away, and only the numinous treasure clan was left behind. It could not harm the interests of the entire numinous treasure clan just because of an individual. This was the foundation of its existence. In fact, if this little fellow thought that it was familiar and asked foolishly, it couldn't even remind him to use a more covert method. It could only remain silent until the little fellow reacted on its own or left in disappointment. This was the Tao, full of hypocrisy. But it had to be said that sometimes hypocrisy was also a way to maintain the balance in the cultivation world. The heavenly Tao still left an opening for all living creatures. It all depended on whether you had the ability to comprehend it. What kind of request would the little guy make? It was very curious. If it couldn't do it, it could only remain silent. In its eyes, the little guy began to manipulate the 5 elements of the small universe. It looked like it was comprehending the changes of the 5 elements here. What was the point? Right now, the evolution of the Taipu realm had already passed the best observation period. It might still be helpful to that little beast, but to the little fellow who had already entered twice, it was simply a waste of time. It couldn't be that stupid, right? It continued to observe. Slowly, the 5 elements controlled by the little fellow began to show strange changes. It was using an extremely profound 5 elements ability to draw in the Taipu realm. Could it be that it wanted to use this method to draw words to ask a question? Although it was a little whimsical, although controlling the innate Tao of the 5 elements was within the scope of the heavenly Tao, it was impossible to use the 5 elements concept to materialize words. It would backfire and fall into the trap of the 5 elements, affecting one's own understanding of the Tao realm. However, there were no words. There were only some big and small, meaningless dots. Some were bright, some were dim, and the brightest cluster was at the center. The light dots were still expanding, and the more dots there were, the more brightness, darkness, size, distance, and spatial position were like an incomplete and inaccurate star map. The Lord of Taipu understood. Smart guy. It was not in vain that it was the most optimistic and had the most hope among all the benefactors. The biggest and brightest spot was the Zhou Xian upper realm. Then, what did I want to ask? The further it went, the more sparse the light dots were, and the more they deviated, full of mistakes. This was very normal. Humans could not draw a star map from the perspective of the universe. They did not have such a long time. For something like this, in the entire universe, only the numinous treasure system could do it. This was because only the spiritual treasures of one or more universes could stay here for hundreds of thousands of years, or even hundreds of thousands of years. They were familiar with all the human cultivation realms and the airspace under their jurisdiction, no matter if it was a high-grade cultivation realm or a low-grade cultivation realm. It also included countless desolate stars and astronomical phenomena above a certain size. When all the numinous treasures in the universe took out the part of the star map they were responsible for and put it together, it would be the most accurate, most direct, and most precious star map of the universe in the entire universe. This star map was infinitely big. You could only look at it by region. This was only in theory, because the numinous treasure's existence principle did not allow them to create such a heaven-defying thing. Perhaps it also knew that it was drawing more and more ridiculous. So the little fellow simply stopped drawing. It only started coloring the part that it had drawn. It was not coloring the whole thing, but just following a direction, turning every star along the way green. Thus, in the star map, a green star belt began to appear, starting from Zhou Xian, all the way to a place where it could not continue. With a shake of its hand, at the end of the green star belt, countless truly chaotic light dots appeared. Lord Taipu completely understood what it meant. That was to say, this place had to pass through the unknown, endless sea of stars. Then, outside the large area of chaotic light dots, the little fellow evolved into the appearance of 2 stars. One was an incomparably huge green light dot, and further away, there were 5 small circles set together, crooked and slanted. The only difference was that the light mark set together by the 5 small circles was dim and lifeless. But that green light that was flashing, emitting a dazzling light. Finally, the little fellow stretched out his hand, and a huge arrow pointed from Zhou Xian to the green light dot. It was all clear. The little fellow was asking for the star map from Zhou Xian to the azure sky great world. He wanted to go home. Chapter 1300. Lord Tai Pu sighed in his heart. Through the evolution of the Tao realm, he arranged the star map to transmit information. It was truly a whimsical stroke of genius. Even the heavenly Tao could not do anything to him. In this sense, he gave full marks for the way this question was posed. But he gave 0 marks for the question itself. It was impossible for him to give such an answer, even if it was through the description of the Tao realm, because he did not know. He could fly over by himself, but he could not find a way to draw the star map that humans could understand. He also did not know the names of the domains and universes that he passed by. Even if he knew, how would he write it down? Would the little guy know after writing it down? The super long-distance travel method of the spirit treasure was to contact the local spirit treasure every time they arrived at a place, so as to get the next direction. This kind of communication was not something that humans could understand or learn. It was closer to the essence of the universe, and not through the human method of north, south, east, west, up, down, left, right. How many miles? How would he say all this? How would he teach it? Even if the Tao realm did not care, it would still be a long process. But he did not want to delay the little guy's thoughts because of him, because he could feel that the return of the universe might not be just a simple return home to visit family, just to carry 2 boxes of desserts to greet the elders. The little guy's intention was actually also in the trend of the universe's changes. What could it do? Lu Xiaoyi, he showed his Tao realm conversation. The rest was left to the will of the heavens. He was actually a little confused. Even if Lord Tai Pu had completely marked out the route, was it definitely something that he could borrow? The dots on the star map, the long and short lines, when they landed in the real universe, were 2 completely different things. Then he saw that on his star map, there was an inexplicable power through the Tao realm of the 5 elements. Next to the brightest spot in Zhou Xian, there was a black spot. What did it mean? He tried hard to think about the location of this black spot, but he could not remember any large celestial domain in this sky region. Then, he suddenly understood that the position of this black spot was actually referring to Taiposhi's own position. Then, under the inexplicable power, the black spot began to move. It followed his green star belt and plunged into countless messy spots, finally appearing next to the green light spot. He understood. 2 years later, Sun Xiaomiao reluctantly left Taiposhi. She was a little unhappy because she felt that there were a lot of things that she didn't fully understand. Unfortunately, her senior brother was leaving. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Although little Miao was smart, it was just a petty trick. The wild boar was stupid, but it had great wisdom. Little Miao, with your current comprehension ability, how long do you think you'll need to completely understand the Tao realm in the Grand Simplicity realm? Little Miao thought for a moment. 100 years? It might not be enough. Maybe a few 100 years, or more. Lu Xiaoyi was merciless. You'll never understand. For you demonic beasts, knowing some things is enough. Your direction is not here. It's in the bloodline. It was a divine ability. It was instinctive. You may have transformed into a human, but you must always remember that you are a demonic beast. This was the essence. You can learn human things, but you have to learn how to differentiate between them. You don't have to learn everything. You can't forget your roots. You're the second demonic beast that I brought into Taiposhi. The first was a wild boar. Then do you know what he did inside? Little Miao tilted her head. What did he do? Lu Xiaoyi sighed softly. He went in for 30 years and slept for 30 years. 1 man and 1 beast returned to Zhou Xian, passing through the air layer. When they passed Xiaoying, he threw little Miao down. Those below are all your senior brothers. Tell them that the 7 years are up. I'll be waiting for them outside. From the time he returned to Zhou Xian to Xiaoying to set up Xiaoying, to Carefree Mountain to learn 3 lives, to rescue the hostages, to meet with Taiposhi before returning, 6 years had passed. He still had 1 year left. In his free time, he thought of a very special person. Originally, he didn't want to take the initiative to touch this kind of thing, but when he came into contact with Taiposhi's Tao realm, he felt a very special power. It was the power that Taiposhi used to control the 5 elements. It was very magical, so magical that his 5 elements couldn't affect Taiposhi's 5 elements. This was very abnormal. Taiposhi was in the circulation realm. When he went in this time, he happened to meet Taiposhi, who was in the highest Yang God realm. Yang God and Yin God were very different, but in terms of the big realms, they were both true monarchs. In addition, he had a very deep understanding of the 5 elements Tao realm, and with the help of the heavenly Tao, when he became a monarch, it could be said that this was the Tao realm that he had studied the most. He felt that he wasn't much weaker than Yang God in the 5 elements, but in Taiposhi's hands, why didn't he have the ability to balance him? During the entire exchange, he was trying to express more through the most basic Tao realm of the five elements. He was also confident that he could guess Taiposhi's intentions from his reaction. However, during the entire exchange, other than when he was setting up the star chart at the beginning, in the rest of the time, his five elements Tao realm was cut up and fragmented. It was almost impossible for him to display it according to his wishes. This was a very strange situation. If Taiposhi wasn't willing to cooperate, he wouldn't even be able to find this stone. It was even more impossible to obtain any useful information from it. But the current situation was that Taiposhi had expressed a clear method of cooperation, but then used a very strange method to refuse to communicate. What was it hinting at? The key was the mysterious ability that Taiposhi had displayed. He was a little familiar with it, because he had felt it when he helped the old man cross the road. At that time, his death gaze had been completely ineffective. This strange power seemed to have a mysterious ability to target the Tao realm. Taiposhi had been displaying this ability all this time. He couldn't help but let his imagination run wild. Was the numinous treasure race also proficient in faith? This was very strange. Shouldn't faith come from life? Did numinous treasures have lives? They were all alone, forever, floating in the void of the universe. They had no companions, no relatives, no joy, no anger. So how could they produce faith? He wanted to find an answer. Among all the people he knew, only one person could help him. He left little Miao in Yao Ing while he went to the primeval continent. He only had 1 year's time. He hoped that guy wouldn't run off. If he couldn't find him this time, when the universe was in chaos the next time, he might not have the time to deliberately look for such an irrelevant person. The thousands of thoughts were gradually becoming clearer. He could feel it, and the others weren't made of wood. Everyone could feel it. He was preparing, and the others were also preparing. There wasn't much time left. Chapter 1301. Lu Xiaoyi was not familiar with the primeval land. He had been here once before, but since he was also a Taoist, he was not restricted here. But if he wanted to find a person, he could not do as he pleased in the primeval cave. He was now a monarch, so he had to be the first to respond to the invitation. There was good news and bad news. The bad news was that his old acquaintance, Hairlip, was not here, but there was a new acquaintance, Taoist Shang Yuan. Shang Yuan was still in the realm of Yuanying, but he was 200 years younger than Lu Xiaoyi, so he had many opportunities. What brings you here, senior brother Shan? In the primeval land, as long as you ask, no one dares to disobey you. Shang Yuan was very polite. After all, they had fought side by side. Although they were not sworn brothers, they were still comrades. Lu Xiaoyi was not polite. I'm looking for someone. Old man Wenji is that crazy big faker who is full of nonsense. Junior brother, do you have his whereabouts? Shang Yuan laughed involuntarily. I know, he is indeed crazy. However, as far as I know, this person is not in the primeval continent right now. I don't know where exactly he went, but I can ask around in the sect. There should be someone who knows. Shang Yuan was very straightforward. He asked in front of him, and the rest was to wait for the news. He poured some tea for Lu Xiaoyi. Senior brother, don't be anxious. The news will come soon. You know, Wenji was invited by us. This is an invitation from a guest, so we have no right to restrict him. He is free to do what he wants. His tricks are very useful. It doesn't matter if you don't believe him. In the primeval land, or even in the whole Zhou Xian Taoist school, there are very few people who believe in his tricks, especially among the high-level cultivators. Everyone has at least 1,000 years of cultivation. How can they change their minds so easily? Lu Xiaoyi nodded. What Shang Yuan said was the truth. Even Lu Xiaoyi himself didn't believe it at all when he first heard those bullish asterisk T. Well, I'm not in a hurry, and it's not a big deal. You also know that this person came to Zhou Xian. I happened to meet him on the way and escorted him all the way here, so I owe him a favor. This universe is getting messier and messier. I still have a small sword vein there. I'm a little worried, so I want to seek divination from the gods for peace of mind. Taoist Shang Yuan laughed. According to Zhou Xian's Taoist rules, when you invite a guest to preach, you're not responsible for escorting them along the way. That's very practical. You don't even have the ability to come. How can you preach? What was the point of preaching? However, Uncle Master had protected him all the way and had taken care of primeval Lord of Heaven's pride. Ever since he came to the primeval land, he was quite well behaved at the beginning. He often appeared in the high-level Dharma gatherings in the sect. He was eloquent, but his way of speaking was far from the way of Taoism. Therefore, there were often disputes. Gradually, he probably realized that it was difficult to find like-minded people among the major cultivators, so he gradually changed his target. He started to preach his way of speaking among the middle and low-level cultivators. Well, it was more popular than among the high-level cultivators. Lu Xiaoyi was very curious. Primeval Lord of Heaven allowed him to do that? Taoist Shengyan laughed bitterly. Of course not. The 7 major Taoist sects of Zhou Xian came to our sect. Which one of them would tolerate someone destroying their foundation? Therefore, there were several attempts to stop him. It was very unpleasant, but there was nothing we could do about it. We need his prophecies, but we don't need his belief system. There are countless contradictions in this. He knew that Taoists like us would not allow him to do as he pleased, so he changed his strategy. He no longer stayed on the mainland, but went to the 3,000 continents. I heard that in these years, he caused quite a lot of trouble. Every time something happened, the unorthodox sects would find trouble with him, and he would run to the primeval land as a safe haven. When the trouble died down, he would run out and continue to spout nonsense. This is why I don't know where he is even when you're here, Uncle Master. And to be honest, it will take time to find him. Not long after, more than 10 messages arrived. Shang Yuan did not hide it, and directly presented the message talisman to him. There were more than 10 messages, but none of them were the same. They were all news of the old Taoist in a certain continent on a certain day. The sources were mixed, and it was impossible to make an accurate judgment. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. It seems that we're not fated. Well, after all, it's illusory. If there's something, we'll listen. If there's nothing, we'll let it go. That's it. This was the normal attitude of a Taoist cultivator. No one would deliberately wait for him because of this. It would be abnormal. Therefore, Shang Yuan did not think much about it, and only invited him. Senior brother, you're a distinguished guest in Primeval Lord of Heaven. Our masters often mention our fellow disciples in the sect, and they often say that it's a pity that we can't get close to each other. If Uncle Master has nothing to do, why don't you stay in Primeval Lord of Heaven for a few days so that we can have a chance to get to know each other? This was the main topic. Unless it was necessary, he could not reject it easily. Otherwise, he would leave the impression that he thought highly of himself and looked down on his fellow Taoists. Of course, Lu Xiaoyi understood. Firstly, it was because he knew that the old Taoist might come back. Secondly, he could discuss the secrets of the 3 lives with the primeval Lord of Heaven and Earth. He heard from Bai Mei that among the 7 great Taoist sects of Zhou Xian, the primeval Lord of Heaven and Earth was the best. He could take this opportunity to see it. The attitude of a cultivator was to accept everything and learn from everyone. If it were someone else, the primeval Lord of Heaven might not pay attention to him. Who would care about a nameless person? This was the benefit of fame. As a famous person, there would naturally be people who would come to communicate with each other. In fact, it was also an opportunity for him to learn. Therefore, at the primeval Lord of Heaven and Earth, there was a small gathering every 3 days and a big gathering after a month. It was not like the swordsman's wine and meat. The orthodox Taoists just had a cup of tea and sat down to discuss Tao. Of course, they would occasionally fight. The primeval Lord of Heaven and Earth focused on his combat experience, while he focused on the theoretical basis of the primeval Lord of Heaven and Earth. They both took what they needed. After a year, they both gained something. Lu Xiaoyi's swordsmanship did not disappoint them because there was no one who could compete with it. The primeval Lord of Heaven's theory was also very profound. From another perspective, it deepened his understanding of the 3 lives. This was the meaning of discussing Tao, to improve together and improve together. On this day, he felt that his time was coming. He bade farewell to the primeval lord of heaven and earth and flew out of the sky alone. Before he flew out of the Chi layer, a handsome Taoist blocked his way. Who else could it be other than the old Taoist Wenji? This old fellow is really cunning. Lu Xiaoyi clasped his hands. Sorry for making you wait, senior. I know nothing about it. Wenji smiled. Not long, not long. Since you came to find me, I must meet you. However, the primeval Lord of Heaven is too conservative and old-fashioned. He's very annoying. So I waited here. Lu Xiaoyi was very regretful. It's a pity that I'm about to go on a long journey and can't stay. Why don't we talk again the next time we return to Zhou Xian? Wenji smiled. A long journey? A long journey is good. I've been in Zhou Xian for many years and have been bored. I'm thinking of going on a trip to the void. I wonder if it's convenient for us to accompany each other? Chapter 1302. The two of them flew towards the spatial passageway in Zhou Xian. He did not reject Wenji's request. The Sword Vein wanted to go to Heaven's Choice gathering. There was no conspiracy behind this. Learning the way of the sword openly was a normal journey of cultivation. There was no need to hide. Moreover, he was very clear that if he rejected Wenji's request, he would not be able to obtain any valuable information from him. Trust was mutual. He was not afraid of variables appearing. What he was afraid of was a lifeless atmosphere. After waiting for half a month in outer space, dozens of auras came from afar. In an instant, they were right in front of him. They were like a huge demon blade, showing off their sharpness. This was a tradition of a shaking shadow realm. It was started by Lu Xiaoyi. Since then, the shaking shadow swordsman had always chosen to fly in a demon blade formation. It was like a huge scythe. As it moved forward, ordinary cultivators would be afraid to avoid it. The only thing that was not harmonious was the cowering little cat behind Blade. Even when Ji was a little confused. Little friend, are you going out to kill people? You didn't tell me. Since that's the case, I might have some matters to attend to. Let's part ways here. The scythe flew through the air and stopped steadily in front of the two. Xie raised his voice. There are 31 swordsmen above Yuanying, 4 true monarchs, and 27 Yuanying. Everyone is present. Please give your instructions, Swordmaster. Lu Xiaoyi nodded in satisfaction. He took out his raft ring and opened it in the air. A medium-sized raft of more than 300 feet long appeared in front of everyone. He did not say much. Get on the raft. The swordsmen did not ask for the reason. Like an army, they filed in. Wenji was still a little confused. However, he was pushed in the raft by Lu Xiaoyi from behind. Since we're here, let's take things as they come. This humble Taoist is looking forward to Senior's trip. The raft formation opened and energy poured in. The passageway slowly opened. Then it disappeared. This scene happened almost every day. A large domain like Zhou Xian was in the prelude to a great change. There would never be a shortage of people who went to the anti-space exploration mission, so no one cared. In the negative space, the floating raft began to pick up speed. To most of the swordsmen, this was only their second time entering the negative space. Due to the limited strength of their sect, they usually did not have such an opportunity, except for the time when they had to reinforce the sword vein on Tiger Hill. At this point, Lu Xiaoyi no longer concealed anything and said loudly, "The destination of this trip is the Heaven's Choice continent. There's a sword vein steel. I'll send you there to improve your abilities. Don't fight, or else you'll embarrass the sword vein." Everyone went from surprise to ecstasy. Heaven's Choice had countless Tao tablets. This was a fact that everyone knew. However, very few people had heard of the sword Tao steel there. Looking at the sword master's arrangement, he must have thought highly of it. To them, it was a huge surprise. They thought it would be a quiet, long-distance raid, but they did not expect it to be an unexpected sword-forging trip. This was a reservation. Only someone as capable as the sword master could fight for such a benefit. Lu Xiaoyi continued. Later, Xie will explain the specific situation and things to take note of. Now come over. I'll teach you how to operate the raft. It'll be useful in the future. He did not want to be a driver for a few years. Some things should be taught. The future was changing, and he could not always do it himself. It wasn't difficult. They were all highly intelligent people. What they lacked was just an opportunity. After making some arrangements, they sat down beside Wenji. Free business class. How about it? Are the conditions okay? After knowing where they were going, Wenji calmed down. Going to the Heaven's Choice continent to preach was not bad. For someone like him, he was not afraid of going to a new place, but he was afraid of not having anyone to support him. Heaven's Choice is good. I wonder how the cultivators there will accept other orthodoxies. Will they be as inflexible as Zhou Xian? Lu Xiaoyi reminded him, in Zhou Xian, you have someone to invite you, so your safety is guaranteed. In Heaven's Choice, if you talk nonsense, you will be regarded as heresy, and no one will protect you. Oh, right. Heaven's Choice should have a monument of faith, right? Since there's a base, I was overthinking. Wenji did not answer him. Obviously, he did not want to expose the arrangement of the path of faith in Heaven's Choice. Or perhaps he did not know. For a widespread inheritance like the path of faith, it was impossible to count on him alone. Everyone had their own division of labor, and each had their own area to be responsible for. It was hard to say, little friend, you went to Primeval to find me. Have you thought it through? Why didn't it seem like it? Lu Xiaoyi smiled. I suddenly had a feeling, so I want to find you for a chat. Actually, it's nothing. Do I have to find you for something? Wenji was not disappointed. No rush. Take your time. Little friend, you have become a true monarch and have an extra 2,000 years of life. You have enough time to think about many things. So, what do you want to talk to me about? Lu Xiaoyi also knew that he could not hide it from him. With such a realm, it was not easy to fool him. Senior, how much do you know about the numinous treasure clan? A smile appeared on Wenji's face. This kid was really practical. Previously, Wenji avoided the path of faith like the plague. Now, he probably knew the benefits of the path of faith. Numinous treasure, justice, self-discipline, self-cleanliness. In this universe's cultivation world, it seems that there is no difference between having them and not having them. You don't have to worry about a numinous treasure suddenly appearing in the enemy's camp in the universe's conflict. Of course, you also don't expect the numinous treasure to wave the flag and shout for you. They scrupulously abide by their neutrality and never deviate. Therefore, they became the last guardian force of the immortal court in the human world. Well, it might be more accurate to say that they are a supervision system. Lu Xiaoyi thought for a while and decided to be frank. Senior, I have no feelings about the path of faith. I won't hide this from you. So, what I asked you here might be a little too demanding. I still prefer a more direct transaction. For example, what can I get from you? What can I help you with? In this way, it will help me know what to ask. What's useless even if I ask? Everyone relax. There's no need to guess and beat around the bush. Wenji was not surprised. This swordsman was too outstanding. He was so outstanding that his own strength was enough to solve most of the problems. The more outstanding a person was, the harder it was for him to accept new ideas. This was because what he had was enough for him to cultivate for a lifetime. I know all about it, but I'm still willing to wait, because I believe that a person who had a firm belief in his previous life will not change in this life. I don't need your help, because our path of faith does not rely on force to spread. You also don't have to worry about my safety. Returning to the path of faith while spreading the path of faith is the best ending for us. I can't give you any practical help. My ability is limited. In terms of fighting strength, I'm far inferior to a swordsman under your command. But I have some knowledge that I can give to you for free. It might be a help to you, but to me, it's actually a process of pulling you into the path of faith. So, feel free to ask. Time will tell whether you will hold on to your beliefs or return to the path of faith in the end. Chapter 1303. After pausing for a moment, Wenji opened his mouth. Have you heard Heaven's Eye? Lu Xiaoyi was startled. What is it? Treasure? In other words, Wenji knew how much he was worth. But he couldn't be blamed. After all, how could a newly ascended master possibly know such a top-notch secret in the cultivation world? Only the young gods of the top sects had heard of it, such as the 9 upper sects of Joseon. Heaven's Eye is not a treasure. It's not an artifact. It's an organization that directly belongs to the immortal court. Its role is to supervise the cultivation world of the mortal world. It's to eliminate people or forces that violate the ethics of cultivation. Lu Xiaoyi opened his mouth wide. There's such an organization? With it around, what do these cultivation sects have to do with it? The so-called dispute is nothing more than a matter of a single command. Wen Ji laughed. It's not that simple. In fact, supervision is the main thing. Elimination is the supplement. It's not a violent organization that runs rampant in the cultivation world of the universe. They believe in namelessness and righteousness. At least that's what they say on the surface. For example, battles between cultivators, between realms, even between orthodoxies, even large-scale interstellar cultivation wars. They think that it's a need for the balance of the universe. Just like the natural world's birth, old age, illness, and death, they don't care about it. Lu Xiaoyi was a little confused. Then what do they care about? When Ji explained, everything that the heavenly Tao thinks might destroy the balance of the heavenly Tao. Of course, the heavenly Tao is just a rule, and the immortals are the ones who enforce it. There's no need to go into detail. But in general, Heaven's Eye has been established for millions of years and still hasn't appeared in the world. You didn't even know about it when you became a perfected lord. It can be seen that their actions are still considered low-key. Lu Xiaoyi was very curious. Then where do their people come from? How many people do they have to take care of countless universes? Are they drawn from various orthodoxies? Or are there specialized training institutions? Wen Ji shook his head. Neither. The executors of Heaven's Eye are hidden in the various sects of the universe. They're usually cultivators, but when they receive a mission, they become the executors of Heaven's Eye. Joseon has these people, Tianza has them, and so does your sword vein. While they were loyal to their sects, they also had to fulfill their obligations to the Heavenly Eyes. This is how Heaven's Eye's executors are formed. They cover every nook and cranny of the universe. Otherwise, if something really happened, they could just send someone over, and maybe the sinner would be gone. Lu Xiaoyi clicked his tongue. This was the first time he had heard of such a thing. It was very shocking. However, once a cultivator had such misgivings in their hearts, they would act more prudently. In Heaven's Eye, apart from the executor system, there is also the otherworld teleportation system. This was to ensure that Heaven Eye cultivators could reach any space at any time, anywhere. This was also the only universal teleportation system in the universe. Not a single realm could do it. In our Joseon upper realm, there are 3 innate spiritual treasures: the Heaven and Earth chessboard, the Ruins of End, and the Taiposhi. One of them must belong to the Heavenly Eye system, but I'm not sure which one it is. Lu Xiaoyi was silent, but he already had a guess in his heart. The executor system and the spiritual treasure system constitute the supervisory structure in the mortal world of cultivation. They are also the only practical embodiment of the immortal court's interference in the cultivation world. So when you ask about the spiritual treasures, all I can tell you is this special identity of the spiritual treasures. No existence can replace them, whether it's humans, other cultivation creatures, or even immemorial beasts with similarly long lifespans. Because no one can hang alone in the sky for tens of millions of years. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Senior, you really know a lot. Wen Ji smiled bitterly. Do you know why we cultivators of the path of faith know all this? Because all along, our path of faith has been heretical in the eyes of Heaven's Eye. We belong to the category of being supervised, suppressed, and eliminated. Lu Xiaoyi wanted to laugh. But I see that you're living quite well now, jumping around quite happily, but you don't have the slightest feeling of impending doom. Wen Ji, on the other hand, found joy in the midst of bitterness. The great Tao has begun to collapse, which is good for us so-called heretical paths. because Heaven's Eye is not watching so closely, especially for people like me, whose realm fluctuates between Yuanying and Monarch. They basically don't care about me. But there's one thing that you must understand, little friend. How can there be heretical paths in this world? It's just that when a certain orthodoxy occupies the dominant position, all the dissidents are classified as heretical paths. Just like if one day my path of faith is favored by the heavenly Tao and becomes the mainstream of cultivation, Taoism and Buddhism are also heretical paths. Then, do you really think that they are heretical paths? A long, long time ago, the path of faith was also the purest orthodoxy. In terms of supporting the mortal world, it even did more than Taoism and Buddhism. The world is unpredictable, but now it has ended up as a heretical path. Lu Xiaoyi ignored his whining. He still didn't understand the trick of crying and pretending to be poor. Those executors, why do they think that they can execute others and not be executed by others? One or two outstanding ones can be understood, but on the level of the entire universe, how can they guarantee their ability to execute? When Ji became serious, faith. As long as you join Heaven's Eye, you will get a gift, the power of faith. It can let you have a special trump card in the battle with cultivators of the same level. Lu Xiaoyi finally understood what Lord Tai Pu meant. He hoped that he could obtain the power of faith. But, Senior, is Heaven's Eye's faith the same as yours? When Ji curled his lips, of course not. Otherwise, why would they suppress us? But it's the same thing, because they come from the same source. Our faith is the faith of complete freedom of self, but Heaven's Eye's faith is the faith of the system. Tell me, are they the same thing? Is a faith that is manipulated still a faith? Lu Xiaoyi pondered for a moment and nodded. Senior, I support your point of view at least on this point. When Ji looked proud. So, even if I want to pull you into the faith path, I can pester you and grind you, but I can't force you. This is the true faith. Let me tell you another secret. Although I don't know the scope of Heaven's Eye selection, there's a standard. The more outstanding one is, the more likely it is. For example, you're likely to become a potential target. Your own ability, coupled with the mysterious power of faith, can guarantee that you can complete any mission of Heaven's Eye. You are still in spirit now. Maybe it doesn't matter for the time being, but when you reach essence spirit, Heaven's Eye's attention will definitely be on you. At that time, can you still shirk? I heard that when Heaven's Eye's faith takes over the body, it is the day when a cultivator's path is cut off. And if you have our faith in advance, then you can neutralize the binding force of Heaven's Eye's faith. This is also the reason why Heaven's Eye hates us to the bone. Now, you know the benefits of accepting our faith path, right? Lu Xiaoyi sighed. You didn't force me, but you old fellow has been tempting me. Chapter 1304. It had to be said that when Ji's words were very deadly. Moreover, this old guy was still sprinkling salt on the wound. What kind of place is the immortal court? A place where immortals live. How long can they live? Almost as long as the heavens and earth. This also means that it is almost impossible for them to die. Then the question is, what is the most important thing for a world to operate normally? It is a real existence, an operational channel to advance. Just like how Foundation Establishment can hope for Jean Dan. Jean Dan wants to break through Yuanying, and Yuanying has the opportunity to become a true monarch. Now that you are a true monarch, you can consider the problem of half immortal. This is the law of the universe, the law of nature. It is the supreme law, no matter if it is immortal or mortal. Therefore, there is a dynasty change in the human world. It has to change. There are a lot of people who want to rise to the top, and there are also a lot of people who have eaten too much and should step down. Therefore, this is the law of nature. It is the same in the cultivation world. What about half immortals? Have you counted how many half immortals there are in Heaven's choice? Have you thought about how many more unspeakable places there are? They also want to take another step forward, but there are no more pits. No more pits. Lu Xiaoyi quietly watched his performance. It was very serious. To be honest, it was very reasonable. If some people want to go up, there are bound to be people who don't want to come down. The circle of immortals is saturated. You can't make it like foundation establishment. Therefore, there is competition, survival of the fittest. There are also some high and mighty existences suppressing them. Therefore, there are countless disputes in the cultivation world of the mortal world. Races, orthodoxies, realms, positive and negative spaces. These things are actually just a matter of a word from the immortal court. You have such a huge monitoring system. What do they not know? Why don't they care? Even if it is their own disciples and grand disciples? Because they can't control it. They can't control it. If you control it, your disciples and grand disciples will soon surpass you. What will you do? Suppression is everywhere. Consumption is natural. This was especially true for the best among them, those who can change the order of the upper class. As one of the most inconspicuous and reasonable ways to make someone fall into a trap without knowing it, joining the heavenly eye system would give someone powerful additional abilities, but it would deprive them of the possibility of advancing further. If you stop at the sun spirit level, you won't even be able to climb to the level of a half immortal, but you will be given a big shining hat to maintain the stability of the universe and maintain the order and harmony of cultivation. Countless human elite cultivators had fallen into this trap and were unable to understand it even when they died. This was the power of faith of the heaven's eyes. Then, do you think you have the luck to become a fish that escapes the net? Lu Xiaoyi was still hoping for a fluke. You can't force a duck onto a perch, right? Such a big organization. Both parties must be in love with each other and collude with each other. When Ji sneered, "You're just a little perfected cultivator. If heaven's eye wants to recruit you, how can you resist? Unknowingly, you will be possessed by faith, and by the time you realize it, you will have already fallen into someone else's bowl. You won't even have the courage to resist. This is another purpose of heaven's eye in selecting outstanding people to supervise the cultivation world of a universe. They want to cut off the path of advancement for geniuses like you, so that when you become half immortals, you won't cause trouble for the high and mighty immortals." Lu Xiaoyi looked at him. "So you pull me into the path of faith to save me?" Old Taoist Wen Ji chuckled. "Not completely. We believe in the path of faith and will never force or threaten you. We're just telling the truth. Believe it or not, it's up to you. Anyway, the path of Taoism is yours, not mine, but from the perspective of faith, although we share the same origin, our faith is pure. I'm not sure, but there's a high probability that we can resolve the influence of the heaven's eye's faith. I won't lie to you about this." Time quietly passed between Lu Xiaoyi's non-committal comments and Old Taoist Wen Ji's boastful talk. The spiritual confrontation between the two was the main theme. Old Taoist Wen Ji was very confident about this. When this little guy went to the primeval continent to find him, he understood this point. The mid-sized floating raft's flight wasn't very stable because the pilot wasn't a novice. Even if they were a novice, they were still yuanying or monarchs. They could get used to this thing very quickly. As long as they were given a target, they could do it. In fact, it wasn't much different from Lu Xiaoyi's control. The difference was that different people had different personalities when they controlled it. Because Lu Xiaoyi asked everyone to familiarize themselves with it, everyone came to try it. 27 yuanying, 3 monarchs, and finally, there was little Meow, who was itching to try it. Along the way, it could be said that there were many situations. Some flew at extreme speeds, some flew steadily. Some liked to fly forward, and some liked to fly backward. Some didn't care about the consumption of resources when they flew, and some stingy ones started to glide after flying at a high speed. Some liked to rush into the sky. Some wanted to show off their skills by flying through meteorites. Some just wanted to fly by themselves. And there were also some who wanted to fly wherever there was spiritual movement to watch the show. Although Lu Xiaoyi was the guardian, the swordsman under him wasn't afraid of him. They all knew that when it came to fooling around, their swordmaster was the real expert. They flew in a crooked manner, sometimes fast, and sometimes slow. Lu Xiaoyi didn't care about them. If they flew normally, would they still be swordsmen? But it was precisely this kind of crooked flying that brought them a little trouble. There was a group of 40 to 50 Heaven's Choice cultivators. There were Yuanying and monarchs among them. They entered the negative space diagonally with a floating raft. This was a normal occurrence in the current Heaven's Choice continent. There were many who had the mood to come out and try their luck. Usually they were from some small or medium-sized country and came out in groups with their friends. Most of them came out to try their luck because most of them didn't have a decent mid-sized floating raft. They only had a few small ones. First, it was to try their luck, and second, it was for spiritual opportunity. In most cases, they could only return with their tails between their legs after wandering in the negative space for more than 10 years. What was luck? For example, meeting an Origin World cultivator who didn't even know how to fly a floating raft was luck. After the group of people bumped into this floating raft and observed it for a while, they quickly had the idea of snatching it for themselves. This was because the floating raft was very ordinary and didn't have any special features. It was specially chosen by Mei for them, and there were no signs of a big power. It was deliberately erased. The flying was very unprofessional, and it was obvious that it was done by a newbie. Then, they judged that the number of cultivators on the raft couldn't possibly exceed their group. With so many advantageous factors gathered together, it was natural for them to turn from cultivators to bandits. In the universe's void, the so-called professions didn't have any special boundaries. If you pulled out a knife, you were a thief. If you picked up a knife, you were a Dao. That was how it was. Chapter 1305. Amidst the confusion on the floating raft, the 50 Heaven's Chosen cultivators began to form an encirclement. Very cautiously, the 2 true monarchs and 8 nascent soul cultivators approached. Plundering floating rafts in the void was a very particular matter. They couldn't just rush in recklessly. This was especially true for mid-sized and above floating rafts, which would often have some kind of hidden offensive formations. The offensive formations used on these rafts were generally very powerful. They were the transformations of the power of the floating raft, which could break through spatial barriers. If such a formation of energy were to hit a nascent soul cultivator, they would undoubtedly die. Even true monarchs will be half dead. Therefore, they had to spread out and surround the floating raft. When they discovered signs of energy gathering on the floating raft, they couldn't run away. The best way was to hide on the other side of the raft. Actually, what they were least worried about was the cultivators rushing out and fighting with them. This was because these mid-sized and below floating rafts could only carry about 30 people at most. There was still a difference in their numbers. Even if they couldn't win, they wouldn't lose much if they scattered and fled. From the looks of it, they probably did this kind of thing quite often. Their luck wasn't bad either. Bad meant that the ones who came out were swordsmen. This orthodoxy had left a deep impression on them a few decades ago at Echo Valley. Good meant that only 7 of them came out. 1 supremacy and 6 yuanying. Under normal circumstances, when a floating raft encountered such a situation, there were only 2 ways to deal with it. Either they relied on their speed to escape, or all the cultivators came out and fought to the death with the bandits. With the swordsmen inside the raft, with this orthodoxy's character, it was inevitable that they would come out and fight. With 7 of them coming out, there were at most 2 or 3 rafts left inside the raft. This was the norm. The swordsmen were very fierce. They came out and fought to the death. In just a few breaths, 1 supremacy and 5 yuanying died under their swords. However, this didn't extinguish Heaven's Chosen's desire for the floating raft. Since the swordsman's identity was exposed, they naturally had to make use of their advantage in numbers. There was no reason for them to escape. The remaining people rushed forward. To Heaven's Chosen's surprise, another 7 swordsmen flew out of the raft. Moreover, the raft started to lose control and spin on the spot. He was also very cunning. The leader of the swordsman team immediately judged the situation. The swordsmen in the rafts had all come out. Now it was 40 people against 14 people. Their chances were very high. Two groups of people fought around the floating raft that no one was looking after. Amidst the intense battle, Tao dissipated and celestial phenomena continued. The swordsman's strategy was very simple. The two of them paired up, one attacking and the other defending. It was a classic aerial battle tactic that Lu Xiaoyi had taught them in his previous life. The main engine wingman, moving across a large area. The main engine and wingmen could switch positions at any time, depending on the specific battle situation. Not only did the two-man teams cooperate with each other, but the teams also cooperated with each other, luring, attacking from the side, biting the tail, ambushing, charging. It was as if they had practiced this cooperation thousands of times. This was not something an ordinary sect could do. It required the trust between companions to entrust their lives to each other. It was an accurate judgment of strength. The leader of the Heaven's Choice cultivators felt that something was wrong as they fought. They originally felt that they had the advantage in numbers, but now they were at a disadvantage. Excluding 3 of his companions who were preparing to take control of the raft, he counted that there were less than 30 people on his side. Counting again, the other side also had 30 people. They had been tricked. He let out a shrill whistle and called for his companions to leave, but his reaction was too slow. It was already too late. The reason why they sent out 7 people first was because they were afraid of scaring them away. It was also to lure them into joining the fray. The reason why they sent out 7 people later was the same, to make them feel that they still had a chance. Then, in the midst of the battle, the floating raft was like dumplings being dropped into a pot. Every time a 2-man swordsman team passed by under the cover of the raft, 2 of them would run over, but 4 of them would run out. Unknowingly, the swordsman team had used their trump cards in the midst of the intense battle. Every Heaven's Choice cultivator was unable to sense this change in the battle. This was because the swordsman team would never gang up on each other. They would only find their own opponents. The Heaven's Choice cultivators felt that they could surround 2 opponents at the start with 4 or 5 of them. But now it was 2 against 2? Where did their companions go? In reality, their companions were decreasing, but their enemies were increasing. There was no one in control of the situation. This was the difference between a motley crew and an army. It was also the difference between a semi-professional and a professional. By the time the leader of the swordsman team understood the situation, it was already too late. Even he was being entangled by a swordsman. It was difficult for him to escape. He was regretting it. Why couldn't he remember the lesson from Echo Valley? Because there were more people? Because that single ear was a special case. There were only 2 people left on the raft, Lu Xiaoyi and Wenji. Lu Xiaoyi was calm, and was even dissatisfied with the performance of his subordinates. Their strategy was correct, but their hands were not nimble enough. Unclean. There was actually someone who couldn't be killed in one strike, and had to be dealt with again. How did they train their swordsmanship? Wenji, on the other hand, was shocked. Ever since the Heaven's Choice cultivators appeared, he had been constantly reminding them to speed up or dodge. If they couldn't do it, then Single Ear could go out and shock them. But this little guy didn't move an inch. His body didn't move, his mouth didn't move, and he didn't even give out a command with his spiritual sense. It was as if everything had nothing to do with him. He just watched the swordsman act on his own. But the result made Wenji cry out in disbelief. The power of this swordsman was definitely not as weak as their numbers made it seem. If they really went out, they could block 100 cultivators, or even more. He had to raise his expectations of this little guy's potential again. Perhaps even more tempting conditions were needed to pull him into the group. In terms of combat power, the path of faith was more of a dependent type. In other words, the best combination was to have a certain orthodoxy's ability, and then use the power of faith to add flowers to the brocade. Purely relying on the power of faith, their methods were too simple and lacked variety. But what he wanted to say now was, you could have driven them away. You didn't have to kill them. Lu Xiaoyi disagreed. Drive them away? Then let them come across the next target and rob them? You have the obligation to bear the consequences of your own actions. Otherwise, The karma of the cultivation world won't be easy to calculate. To me, when they decided to rob, they naturally became the whetstone for us to sharpen our swords. Either the stone collapses the sword, or the sword splits the stone. It's very fair. When Ji sighed, he finally understood why the path of faith had fallen, but he was unwilling to accept it. I have no objections to the leader's punishment, but it's obvious that many of them were coerced and coerced. Perhaps they didn't want to do so. Lu Xiaoyi sighed as well. I'm not the heavenly Tao. I'm not in charge of judgment and arbitration. I'm even less interested in probing into other people's thoughts. You're already a Yuanian cultivator, and you're still talking about being coerced? Senior, according to you, what kind of faith do you have with such a state of mind? Is it devotion or sacrifice? This is a little similar to Buddha cutting off his flesh to feed the eagles. But I'm afraid you don't have enough meat to feed the wolves of this world. Chapter 1306. The mid-sized floating raft continued its journey in a crooked manner. When Ji became silent, he realized that under this little guy's casual attitude, there was an incomparably tenacious heart. He realized that even if this person really had faith one day, it would be because he wanted it and not because of his persuasion. This made him, who had always prided himself on his persuasion ability, a little disheartened. However, his faith was to persevere. Lu Xiaoyi suddenly thought of a question. Senior, I remember that your profession is to predict the order of the collapse of innate Taos, right? How is it? Do you have any new inspiration? When Ji closed his eyes, I will teach you faith for free, but to predict the collapse of Taos, you will need inspiration to pave the way. To judge the time, you will need 500 purple purity for a range of 100 years and 5,000 purple purity for a range of 10 years. To judge the specific Taos, I will give you 10 answers for 500 purple purity and 3 answers for 5,000 purple purity. The exact answer will require 10,000 purple purity. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. In other words, if I want to know which Taos will collapse in which year, I will need to pay 10,000 purple purity. Why don't you just rob me? 2 years later, under Lu Xiaoyi's instructions, the floating raft began to slow down. They had already arrived at the agreed place with the immemorial beast. He needed to communicate with the immemorial beast in advance. In his heart, he still didn't want the swordsman to know that the Heaven's Choice immemorial beast was also a potential ally. This would cause the swordsman to become dependent on him. Furthermore, there was also old Taoist Wenji. He didn't care about the fact that the swordsman went to the sword path tablet to study, but the alliance of the immemorial beast needed to be kept a secret. Only then could it be used at the most crucial moment. He flew alone to the depths of the negative space and returned to the floating raft after 10 days. Under his control, he began to fly towards the Heaven's Choice gravitational field. This was the real immemorial path. Although he couldn't see a single immemorial beast beside him, there were actually a few monarch-level beasts clearing the path for him from afar. He kept everyone in the dark. The process went very smoothly. They were in the sky above the northern region, so there were no traces of humans, only beasts. The swordsman continued to stay on the floating raft, traversing through the sky above the northern region. The mountains and rivers below were magnificent. Every swordsman was deeply moved by the vastness of Heaven's Choice. Apart from Lu Xiaoyi, this was the first time the others had entered Heaven's Choice. Of course, the old Taoist could not explain it clearly. This old man was very strange. It was only when they were close to Lu Haizi that Lu Xiaoyi kept the floating raft and led everyone in flying. Other than when Ji and Little Meow, everyone else was very excited. This was the holy land of the swordsman, a sea of swordsmanship. Those who did not practice swordsmanship would not be able to understand this feeling. Lu Xiaoyi was very satisfied when he saw the sword steel in the distance. That was because the 30 swordsmen were following behind him, and none of them lost control and rushed over. He turned around and looked at the 2 mutants. What do you think? Do you want to go in with us and experience it? He asked this because he had already noticed the conflict between the two mutants. Not every creature liked swords. In fact, in the cultivation world, there were far more creatures who hated swords than liked swords. When Ji was the first to speak, "Forget about me. My old arms and legs can't withstand your torment. I'm one of the human countries on Heaven's Choice. It's not easy to come here, so I have to experience the local customs. You don't have to look for me. I might go back to the sword steel to look for you, or I might not. Whether we can meet again depends on fate." The old Taoist walked confidently, heading straight for the south. Who knew what he was planning? Seeing Lu Xiaoyi's gaze move over, little Miao was a little embarrassed. "Senior brother, I have no feelings for flying swords. I won't go in. I won't go to the human countries either. It's too dangerous. I don't want to get caught again. I'll just walk around the northern region. When I passed by just now, I found a lot of interesting beasts. I think I'll be able to stay here more comfortably." Lu Xiaoyi didn't force it. Every cultivation creature had their own choice. Let nature take its course. Little Miao had its own instincts. Just like how cultivators had the need to go to the human mortal world to experience, the mortal world of beasts was the world of beasts. This was their instinct. Releasing his divine sense, he looked at Fat Cattle, who was far behind. "Fat Cattle, look after this little guy. Don't wait until I come out, and it becomes your ancient beast snack." Fat Cattle chuckled. "Senior brother, don't worry. With me looking after it, nothing will happen. And with its size, it's not even qualified to be a snack. At most, it'll be a toothpick meat." After the arrangements were made, a group of swordsmen flew out of the sword steel. It was mottled bamboo and baronier. Lu Xiaoyi chuckled. "Come, a tortoise looks at a green bean. Let's see if you two can match." In the year 386 of the immortal Zhou calendar and the year 399 of the Heaven's Choice calendar, two sword ranges from different realms met at the Sword Dao Steel. This was the embryonic form of the Sword Soldier Legion that would become famous in the future, a legion that would run amok in the universe. And on the day of the meeting, all the swordsmen had to endure the teasing of their first army's main sword, Tortoise Green Bean. The sword path steel, Willow Sea, had completely become the swordsman's territory. No one else came to disturb them. The immemorial beasts had a prior agreement and wouldn't come. Even if there were human cultivators who didn't get along with the swordsmen, they wouldn't come either, because you couldn't fight against more than 200 swordsmen. There were countless heaven selection cultivators. If there were no benefits and purely for fighting, who would come here to provoke these lunatics? Inside the sword path steel was the place where the swordsmen learned the sword ancestors' sword techniques. Outside the sword path steel, it was the clash of the positive and negative space sword vein. The swordsmen's friendship was very pure. More importantly, they spoke with their swords. Thus, inside the sword path steel, the shadow-shaking swordsmen were beaten up miserably by the sword ancestors' 9 realms. Here, they competed with their numbers to see who could last the longest in the 9 realms. Of course, although it was called the 9 realms, it was actually just the 5 realms. 3 birth realms, sword path realms, heavenly phenomenon realms, and sword apprentices realms. They didn't have the qualifications to enter. In the comparison of the rankings, the shadow-shaking realm cultivators were ranked lower because they weren't familiar with the 9 realms. In order to create a good learning atmosphere, Lu Xiaoyi, who didn't like rankings, created an internal ranking. There were a total of 246 swordsmen. Among the 6 realms, the bottom 10 and the top 10 would all be punished. Outside the sword path steel, the swordsmen competed with each other. In this aspect, the shadow-shaking realm cultivators were obviously stronger than the heaven selection cultivators. Especially in group battles, they were basically wiped out every time. The rhythm of being pressed to the ground. Whoever lost would be punished as a whole. As for the rewards, according to the tradition of the swordsman, of course, it couldn't be higher than the sword ancestor's reward. In other words, it couldn't be higher than 1 low-grade spirit stone. Lu Xiaoyi was very grateful to the crow ancestor this time. Otherwise, these rewards would have made him a pauper. No one said anything because he, Lu Xiaoyi, had only received one low-grade spirit stone after passing the foundation stage. Since the sword ancestor was already like this, what else could these bastards want? As for the punishment, Lu Xiaoyi had his own way of doing it. It was to run naked around the Willow Sea. Chapter 1307. The Willow Sea had a new legend, but it wasn't a good one. It was a bad one, a perverted one. There were many losers. The last 10 realms of the 6 realms had a total of 40 or 50 people. How could they lose 2 or 3 realms in a row? In the group battle outside the monolith, there would be dozens of losers every time. These two groups of losers combined together would make for a majestic scene. They would run around the Willow Sea naked once. Some of them were even unlucky enough to run 2 or 3 laps. This created a unique scenery in the Willow Sea. The military system was a unique furnace. It allowed you to integrate into the group at a faster speed, gradually turning you into a pure killing machine. In the beginning, there were some swordsmen who resisted such a vulgar punishment because of their chastity. They didn't want to carry it out, thinking that it was an insult to the cultivator's character. But there were also some who didn't care. They just liked this kind of perverts. They took it as a form of pride to be in close contact with nature. Occasionally, when Lu Xiaoyi's group of Heaven's Volition sword cultivators was defeated in a group battle, he had, of course, intentionally gone easy on them. As the sword master, he ran circles in the air above the Willow Sea without any restraints, and even sang loudly. Under such an example, any resistance would vanish into thin air, and after you ran around naked and sang loudly a few times, you would realize that it wasn't that bad after all. It wasn't that unacceptable. Instead, you would have a stronger sense of identity with the group. You would be more unscrupulous and do whatever you want. You would be more arrogant and despotic. You would be more lawless. Swordsmen had to be lawless in order to fully display their battle prowess and destructive power. A swordsman who was always thinking would be a hindrance when working with a group of swordsmen. This required a high degree of mutual identity and unhesitatingly trusting each other in life and death. These could only be trained to the greatest extent in battle. Normally, this kind of strange method of running around naked was required. Because it was strange, because it challenged the norm, because it was a pervert that couldn't be tolerated in the secular world. In the Willow Sea, there were no human cultivators, demonic beasts, or ancient beasts. But this place never stopped normal humans from migrating. More than 10,000 years ago, the Crow ancestor had completely cured the polluted Willow Sea. After 10,000 years, the Willow Sea had once again become a rich and beautiful area. Where there was fertile soil, there would be hard-working farmers. Over the past 10,000 years, dozens of villages of various sizes had gradually formed around the Willow Sea. They worked at sunrise and rested at sunset, living their ordinary lives. Until one day, groups of perverted immortals began to appear in the sky. They were not wearing any clothes, and they swaggered around with their spears. Every 10 days, they would make a round. She was even afraid that you wouldn't know. So she sang loudly. As a result, it slowly became a big festival for the peasant women. Every time it happened, they would bring a small stool and wait in anticipation. It was also one of the great joys after the busy farming season. Lu Xiaoyi was in the sword Dao steel. Once he had put the swordsman on the right track and shared his swordsmanship concepts with everyone, he could leave the rest to chase Xie, Song Rong, and Zhou Fan. He would not participate in these detailed polishing as he had more important things to do. One's own strength would always be the one and only principle of a sword cultivator. When he first entered the sword Dao steel, his plan was to start from the foundation stage, and then start on to the most important triple birth stage. However, after learning from Zhou Xian, he changed his mind and decided to start from the lowest to the highest level, one step at a time. Swordsman, you can be crazy when fighting with the sword, but you must be careful when learning the sword, because a solid foundation can ensure that you are not crazy even if you are crazy. In the advanced stage, it was still a shadow. The sword ancestor's sword was always so casual. In the advanced stage, it was a sea of swordsmanship. In the Jean Dan stage of the swordsman, he would start to use all kinds of strange methods and officially start to come into contact with the power path. Unlike the monotonous foundation stage and the Yuanying stage, the swordsman stage of the Jean Dan stage was actually the most interesting stage. It was also the stage where swordsmanship and tactics were the most complicated. The moment Lu Xiaoyi entered, he immediately felt a strong pressure. The Crow ancestor had too many tricks, so many that he was dazzled. It was too much to handle. However, compared to the foundation stage, his situation was much better. This was because he was already on the right path in the union of man and sword. With the same foundation as the Crow ancestor, even if his swordsmanship was weaker, he could use other methods to overcome it. The first time he entered, he fought with the Crow ancestor for 2 hours. In the end, the Crow ancestor's flying sword pierced his anus from a strange angle. This Crow ancestor was really unscrupulous. After several battles, he had a basic understanding of the strengths of both sides. It should be said that the gap between them was not big. In terms of the application of power, he had more methods than the Crow ancestor. The Crow ancestor only used 2 kinds of power in the Jean Dan stage, the killing power and the go horn power. And he also had the star power, the overbearing power, and the dispersing power. Lu Xiaoyi realized that although he had many powers, they were not decisive in the battle. How could he overpower the Crow ancestor? Because the Crow ancestor's application of power was simple, the dispersing power was meaningless. In fact, the only advantage he and the Crow ancestor had in terms of power was the star power. However, in terms of the integration of man and power, he was not as good as the Crow ancestor. Therefore, in terms of power, it was a tie. The difference was in the variety of swordsmanship. This was the systematic difference between the inner and outer swordsmanship. When Lu Xiaoyi formed his gold core, he did not learn too many swordsmanship. This was because the outer swordsmanship was more about carving sword formations on the flying sword. It was very rigid, and he did not like it. Therefore, he did not learn it and focused on strengthening his set of swordsmanship when he was in the foundation stage. However, the inner swordsmanship was different. Due to the uniqueness of the sword pill, they did not need to put too much effort into the flying sword itself. They had a very good consistency in cultivation. Therefore, there were many choices in swordsmanship, so many that the outer swordsmanship was envious. The others were not so bad. The ones that gave Lu Xiaoyi the most headaches were the few swordsmanship that the Crow ancestor was good at. Stand 2 to Split 3, Secret Sword of Thunder, and Air Leap Killing Sword. This caused him to be unable to attend to one thing and lose sight of another, causing him to have a headache. He could see that the Crow ancestor's swordsmanship in the Jean Dan stage was still focused on simplicity. It was more swordsmanship than the swordsman like him who could not differentiate between the inner and outer swordsmanship, but it was far less than the normal inner swordsmanship. However, with these few moves together with the seamless escape technique, the wonderful goat horn stance, and the profound basic ability, he could defeat him on the offensive. There was also a very important aspect. In terms of defense, the Crow ancestor had an extra layer of 5-element sword garment to complement the Golden Thunder body. Although it was not a complete set of 5 elements, it was estimated that it was not collected during the Jean Dan stage. However, the strong defensive ability also gave him more ability to combine swordsmanship. Lu Xiaoyi's defense during the Jean Dan stage was relatively weak because he did not cultivate his body. He only relied on a few defensive swordsmanship to support himself. This was very difficult for him. When the opponent's resistance was stronger than his, the Crow ancestor would not be affected by the attack. However, he would have to consider the gains and losses in every possible way. Hence, he would lose the right to speak on equal terms. Chapter 1308. Of course, Lu Xiaoyi had his own advantages too. During the Jean Dan stage, His consolidation of his own characteristics was much stronger than Crow ancestors. That was the power of the heavy sword with various enhancements. He already had an advantage when he was in the foundation establishment stage. Now that he was in the Gene Dan stage, his advantage was still growing. Such a long-range heavy sword was already able to suppress outside of its range. In other words, if Crow ancestor wanted to hit him, he would have to go through his heavy sword first. He knew very well that it was impossible for him to learn the internal sword techniques of the Crow ancestor now. They were all sword techniques of the Golden Core stage. If he, a perfected cultivator, learned them, wouldn't he be reversing history? What he really needed to do was to make the best use of his advantages. Keep Crow ancestor out of his range of attack, and kite him. There were two ways to defeat an opponent. One was to learn other people's swordsmanship and follow other people's path. That was not very smart. A confident swordsman would work hard on his specialty and make it even more deadly. That was what he should do. Otherwise, how could he be stronger than Crow ancestor? With a goal, the next problem was how to tap into his potential. It was also the problem of adjusting his sword techniques. These problems were not obvious when facing an average opponent, but when facing a top expert, they would be exposed. This was the meaning of the Sword Dao tablet. It could reveal the deepest loopholes in your sword techniques. In the future, when you meet a top cultivator of the same level, you would not lose your life. Fortunately, in his 1,000 years of cultivation, he had not met an opponent of the same level. However, it did not mean that he would not meet one in the future. How'd he pass? Actually, it was the same as the foundation stage. He only needed to kill Crow ancestors' sword wish once. This was because no matter how much he trained, he could never be sure that he could defeat Crow ancestor in the Sword Dao tablet's 9 realms. It was just a probability. Even if it was a question of probability, it was not something that other sword cultivators could do. They all had 0 probability. To most sword cultivators, the test was to see how long they could persevere. What useful things could they learn from failure? 5 years later, he had lost count of how many times he had been in there. Finally, one day, he succeeded in suppressing the Crow ancestor outside of its attack range. After several days of hard fighting, the Crow ancestor was unable to reach him with its sword. It died under the endless long-range heavy sword attacks. It was inevitable, but it was also accidental. When he came out, he saw 200 to 300 pairs of eyes staring straight at him, filled with anticipation. He knew what they were waiting for. These guys were waiting for him to announce the prize. Zofan was the record holder in the Ascension realm. 30 minutes was enough for him to look down on all the heroes, but he did not have any hope of defeating the Sword Ancestor. This was not a matter of confidence or not. If the gap in strength was too big to talk about confidence, then it was ignorance and arrogance. He shouted for the first time, "Boss, they all said that you opened a defective low-grade spirit stone in the first round, but I don't believe it. Now that we've waited so long, all 30 of us agree that we should get a celestial item." The 30 people he spoke of were actually the 30 people from the shadow-shaking realm. Even though the two sides were no longer as clear as before, there were still some things that were clearly separated. For example, their suspicions towards the rewards. Banju was tit for tat. "We still think it's trash. We've made a bet. Whoever loses will run a lap around the neighboring Mirror Country." The Mirror Country was a small human country right next to the Willow Sea region. It had a lush population and many mortals. To run a lap around there naked was not a small bet. Of course, for those who were shameless, it didn't matter. Was it 30 people? Or was it 200 or so people running naked together? Was that a problem? But he had to clarify something first. Which side am I on? Do I have a choice? Zofan said matter-of-factly, "Boss, of course you're on our side." Banju said matter-of-factly, "Boss should be on our side. How could he possibly think that it would be a celestial item? He's already been slapped in the face." Huang Yin stepped forward to be the peacemaker. "Boss is everyone's boss. Of course he's on both sides." Lu Xiaoyi looked at him with an unkind expression. "Huang Yin, you have a bright future ahead of you. You're using me as a favor." Whoever loses will have to run a lap around the place. Under everyone's expectant gazes, Lu Xiaoyi walked closer to the word. It shone with a golden light and radiated a dense aura. Just this appearance alone was very grand, but he knew that this crow ancestor was probably not a decent person. It was impossible to expect him to be as dignified as a Taoist cultivator. But could there be anything more shameless than a low-grade spirit stone as a reward? Originally, he wanted to open it when no one was around, but how could that be possible? Don't look at how these fellows didn't seem to care about him entering and exiting the higher realms. They were all pretending. In fact, they were all focused on him breaking through the realms. They were all waiting for this day. They had even discussed the bet. Lu Xiaoyi naturally had to satisfy everyone's request. He had to entertain himself and his brothers. Of course, he also had to satisfy the crow ancestor's wicked taste. He slapped his hand on a large word. A jade slip fell down. Immediately, the shadow-shaking realm cultivators cheered. How could the dignified sword ancestor use a low-grade spirit stone to fool them? Then it must be a celestial item or a peerless secret technique. This time, it seemed to be a peerless sword technique that couldn't be placed on the Sword Steel 9 realms. What was it? But no one asked because this was the sword master's reward. According to the rules of the cultivation world, they couldn't casually ask about it. The Heaven's Choice Swordsman group was also very vexed. They had been led astray by experience, who said that if the first reward was a low-grade spirit stone, then the next reward would be something of the same value. The Foundation Realm reward of Spirit Stone was very suitable. After all, it was the Foundation. Now that it had been raised, the reward naturally had to be raised as well. The Jade Slip was very simple and unadorned. This was in line with the respect that the cultivation world had for ancient things. Cultivators weren't nouveau riche. They didn't disdain dazzling and eye-catching things. The more simple and unadorned things were, the more precious they were. They were all brothers who had run naked together. Although everyone knew that as cultivators, it was a little impolite to stare at the sword master as he opened the reward, making it seem like they hadn't seen much of the world. But after interacting with each other for so long, no one was willing to leave. Lu Xiaoyi was immensely proud of himself as he flipped open the ancient jade slip in front of everyone. As he looked, his mouth gradually opened and his eyes became blurred. His face began to flush. His hands were trembling. Some of the sharp-eyed swordsmen could even see that the corner of the sword master's mouth was dripping with sparkling liquid. He suddenly closed the jade slip and took deep breaths. It was as if he couldn't calm his agitated heart. After a long time, he finally calmed down. Looking at the envious gazes of the 200 people below, his eyeballs almost popping out. Only then did he sigh. Sigh, we're all brothers. Even if there's something good, we can't enjoy it alone. What should we do? Although no one said anything, the swordsman's eyes seemed to have turned watery as if they could speak. The meaning was clear, but it wasn't good to open his mouth. Fine, we're brothers. We can't enjoy it alone. But just now, someone said that I belong to Zhou Fan's side and also to Ban Zhu's side. Everyone replied in unison. The sword master is the arbiter. Of course, you don't belong to any side. In the future, such punishments will have nothing to do with the sword master. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. In good, but I feel that it's too cold for you to keep flying in the air. I feel that everyone should fly at a low altitude. That way, it'll be warmer and more approachable. There's no need to split any bets. Let's all fly together. It's not a waste for me to take out the sword master's treasure and share it with you. For the sake of the peerless secret technique, both sides had no objections. Wasn't it just flying at a low altitude so that others could see more clearly? It was indeed awkward for one person to fly, but if 200 people flew together, it didn't seem to be a problem, right? Seeing that everyone agreed, Lu Xiaoyi pushed the jade slip in front of them. So, swordsman is a man of his words. You can't go back on your words. He turned around and hid in the green netherworld mirror. Chapter 1309. The swordsman seemed a little strange. Some of the sharper swordsmen had already realized that something was wrong. Huang Yin had a lingering fear in his heart. Why do I feel that something is wrong? The crowd of sword cultivators surrounded the book with 3 layers inside and 3 layers outside. In the middle was the supreme sword technique. Everyone looked forward to it. Banju stretched out his hand and flipped to the first page. There were 3 crooked words. What are you looking at? None of the swordsmen could understand it. Was this some kind of eye technique? What were they looking at? Flipping down, on the second page, the secret technique finally revealed its true colors. 5 bold and flamboyant words were written on the second page. Huangting Sutra of the Interior. This thing had long been sold on the streets. Perhaps some people in remote realms would still take it seriously. However, in high-grade cultivation realms like Heaven's Choice and Zhou, this thing was too hard to even wipe one's but with. It wasn't that there was a problem with the technique. There was no problem with the technique, and it pointed directly to the great Tao. However, that was referring to the ancient times, when the spiritual energy was substantial. There was no problem with the technique. It was just that the environment had changed, and it was outdated. It was no longer suitable. The result of practicing this technique was worse than the trashiest third-rate technique on streets. No matter what, one could still practice it. It wasn't like this thing that couldn't be practiced at all. Now, this thing was already the same as those ancient techniques. It was just a small number in the shops. 1 spirit stone was a little too much. It was the cost of a jade scroll. Of course, it might be a fake. On the surface, it looked like the Huangting Sutra of the Interior, but there was another world within. Banju continued to flip, but at this time, most of the swordsmen, especially the swordsmen from Heaven's Choice, already had a premonition. They flipped through page by page, word by word, chapter by chapter. It was exactly the same as the one in their minds. Some of the swordsmen had already begun to sigh. However, Banju was a patient person. He only came to a conclusion after reading the whole thing. Very good. After careful study, this is an ordinary copy of the Huangting Sutra of the Interior from 10,000 years ago. Is there anyone else who has a different opinion? Seeing everyone's shameful expressions, Banju's heart ached. Brothers, is your willpower still not strong enough? Or were they always thinking of using external objects and peerless secret techniques to help them reach the heavens in a single bound? This time, the main culprit was the sword ancestor, an accomplice to the sword master. It was all for the sake of that sliver of luck in everyone's hearts. Since there are no objections, let's take off our clothes and parade. One of the swordsmen said weakly, "Brother, the Mirror Kingdom is a country with rules. They don't allow people to be naked. If someone scolds us from the sky, should we fight?" Song Rong didn't mind. "It's fine. If everyone wears a pair of socks, then we won't be naked." In the green netherworld realm, Tao realms clashed, but sword light was rarely seen. This stage tested one's Tao realm ability during the Yuanying stage. Among the previous 3 stages, Lu Xiaoyi felt that this was the easiest stage. More than 10,000 years ago, there were only a few cultivators who had reached the Tao realm during the Yuanying stage. They were limited to the most talented cultivators, and they had to have their own great opportunities. At that time, the cultivators didn't know the future trends of the Tao realm. They still followed the ancient principles of cultivation and took one step at a time. Yuanying stage was the foundation of the Tao realm, and they could improve further when they became perfected lords. Now, the era was different. It was also the universe's cultivation environment that forced the cultivators to do this. Of course, there were many more opportunities to comprehend the Tao realm. For example, Lu Xiaoyi was proficient in 6 Khanate Daos. He had a rough understanding of most of the other Daos, including the Star Tao. In this aspect, his foundation was much stronger than the Crow ancestors when he was in the Yuanying stage. After careful observation, the traces of the Crow ancestors' Daos were vivid in his eyes. The 5 elements, yin and yang, thunder, slaughter, he was proficient in these. He also had a rough understanding of Tai Chi and destruction. Compared to Lu Xiaoyi, the Crow ancestors' Daos were much weaker. Therefore, as soon as he entered the Qingming stage, Lu Xiaoyi firmly gained the upper hand. This was his first time entering the Sword Dao steel. In fact, he wasn't the only one. Among the 5 steel realms in the Sword Dao steel, the third stage generally lasted the longest. For example, Model Bamboo, Zofan, and a few other perfected lords could last for almost 2 hours on average. It was also their favorite stage. Lu Xiaoyi fought steadily and surely. He had his own unique understanding of the collision of the Dao realm. What he learned here was how the Crow ancestor controlled life and death through the changes in the Dao realm. To be honest, in terms of the depth and breadth of the Dao realm, he was stronger than the Crow ancestor. However, in terms of how to convert the energy of the Dao realm into combat strength, he was inferior. This was also the reason why he had been entangled with the Crow ancestors' Dao realm. In fact, it was also a learning process. From the beginning, this process didn't seem to have any intention of stopping. In the domain of the Dao realm, the most basic core concept was that there was no difference between knowing one Dao and knowing 36 Daos. If you can study a certain great Dao thoroughly, one great Dao would be enough. From this point of view, the Crow ancestor didn't take advantage of him. In terms of understanding the Dao realm, with the height that he had achieved as an immortal, no one could compare with him. However, the Crow ancestor's sword didn't do that. It only faithfully displayed the level that the Crow ancestor had achieved during the Yuanying period. Therefore, everyone still had a chance to play. This game lasted for a full 10 years. Lu Xiaoyi didn't go out even once. He was in a stalemate with the Crow ancestor inside. After 10 years, the fun was over. Only then did he understand that it didn't matter who killed who in the end. It was like chatting with a friend whom you had never met before. Chatting to your heart's content was more important than anything else. When he came out, no one surrounded him. Even though the word award was still lit up, none of the swordsmen who passed by looked at him in the eye. A stalemate for 10 years, neither losing nor winning. Could this be considered to have passed the Crow ancestor's test? Lu Xiaoyi swayed in front of the word award and shouted, "I'm going to open the award." There were more than 100 swordsmen in the space. Some entered the monument realm. Some went out to compete, but none of them stopped. In an instant, all of them left. Lu Xiaoyi was a little bored. How dare they ignore their parents? Wasn't it just a parade in the Mirror Kingdom? How big of a deal was that? Did they all think that they were unmarried wives? He happened to see Huang Yin come out of the monument realm, so he pointed at him. "Huang Yin, come here." Huang Yin was caught red-handed. There was nothing he could do. The sword master had called him, so he couldn't run away. He was a little cautious. "Boss, what's the matter? Look at me, I'm still busy." Lu Xiaoyi threatened, "Busy my ass. Are you hiding from the God of Plagues? I'm going to open the award, but none of the underlings are coming to support me. Is this normal?" Huang Yin was helpless. "Boss, it's not that we don't know anything. It's just that we were tricked by you last time. We still have lingering fears, and now we're all sick." Lu Xiaoyi was a little puzzled. "You guys have been running around Willow Heizi for so many years. There are so many girls and wives along the sea that you're tired of, but I don't see you guys doing anything. Why are you guys acting like you've lost your chastity after going to the Mirror Kingdom? Speaking of which, do you have that thing?" Huang Yin smiled bitterly. "Yes, it's a little unfortunate. At that time, there was a large group of Kuan cultivators from the Mirror Kingdom to learn and exchange. When they were holding a Dharma assembly, we flew over at a low altitude. Lu Xiaoyi was even more puzzled. Weren't you guys wearing socks?" Chapter 13:10. Time passed by happily as they cultivated. However, this happiness was only on the surface. There were no fools here. Every swordsman understood that this was probably the last period of leisure they would have in the future. Whether or not they could survive until they were truly at ease was their greatest motivation to stay here. Strength, through complementing each other, would bring about rapid growth. This wasn't talking about cultivation realms. Cultivation realms were things that couldn't be helped by excessive enthusiasm. Everyone understood this logic. However, for swordsmen, they could greatly improve their swordsmanship. This was because the sword vein itself had the greatest combat potential. Moreover, these two groups of swordsmen had a lower starting point compared to the real Xianyuan swordsmen. The swordsmen from the Shaking Shadow realm lacked the tempering of the Crow ancestor. On the other hand, the swordsman from Heaven's Choice lacked the tempering of a sword master. From the looks of it, no matter how amazing the Sword Dao tablet was, the Shaking Shadow realm swordsman who had the guidance of a sage was still stronger. This was because a sage could accurately point out your fatal weakness. The most important thing was that the swordsmen from Heaven's Choice were all unorthodox. They had done all sorts of things before they started cultivating the sword. Their foundation wasn't very stable, and they had to rely on themselves to figure things out. They weren't like the Shaking Shadow swordsman. No matter how weak the foundation of Zhou Xian sword vein was, it still had a basic system. The integration of both sides was a process of mutual improvement. This was the reason why Lu Xiaoyi was willing to lose 20 years to bring the Shaking Shadow swordsman over. His teachings alone and the teachings of 30 Shaking Shadow realm swordsmen were two completely different concepts. The time it took to see results was far greater than the loss of 20 years. Although Lu Xiaoyi had never asked the swordsman not to leave the Sword Dao tablet, this taboo was still faithfully carried out by every swordsman. This was especially true for the Shaking Shadow swordsmen from the Origin world. They were very clear that the key issue wasn't that Heaven's Choice had 30 more swordsmen, but that they couldn't let other powers know that swordsmen had the ability to freely enter and leave Heaven's Choice. This was the biggest guarantee for future covert operations. Less than 300 people and more than 20 true monarchs. This was a force that couldn't be ignored. But if placed in the entire Heaven's Choice continent, perhaps it would only be a slightly stronger mid-sized country. Therefore, it was necessary to maintain a mystery. Good steel should be used on a blade. Fortunately, the current environment of the Sword Dao steel made it hard for people to leave. This place had the best sword ancestor, the best leader, and the best companions. If you missed this place in this period of time, where would you find such a perfect opportunity to improve? Che Xie and the rest of the Shadow Sword sect started to slowly instill their ideals. It was much smoother than what they had imagined. It was because they were already very experienced. It was because these Heaven Selection sword cultivators had lived their entire lives in solitude, and because they had a leader who was so powerful that it was abnormal. At this point, the swordsmen were no longer differentiated by whether they were Shaking Shadow or Heaven's Choice. They had truly become one, and were beginning to form a powerful fighting force. Whether or not they should choose a more resounding name was something that sword cultivators often discussed and quarreled about. Of course, their so-called quarreling was actually fighting. In the end, no one was able to convince the other. In the end, it was Lu Xiaoyi who personally came out to settle this dispute. Because of his master, Xianyuan, he really couldn't think of a better name. It wasn't suitable either. When he returned to Xianyuan in the future, how would he deal with it? But there must be a unified name. In the future, they would act as one in battle. Since it wasn't good to use the name of a sect, then they would use a battle name. The swordsman army was thus born. Lu Xiaoyi would only fight with them when he left the Steel Realm. His main purpose was to point out the shortcomings of the swordsman's cultivation. As a sword master who could pass the Steel Realm 3 times, he was the soul of this group of swordsmen. His status was equal to the sword ancestors, but he knew that he wasn't. If there was a day when he could reach the level of the Crow ancestor, then he would have the confidence to do so. But now he was still thousands of miles away. 50 years had passed. During this time, he passed the realm of omnipotence and the realm of game. Although the Crow ancestor tacitly allowed him to pass the realm of game, he also knew that he actually took advantage of the situation. The Crow ancestor really limited his strength to a certain level. This was his ability as a Daoyuo Golden Immortal. He was realistic. But the crow ancestor was actually very tolerant to challengers. Other than limiting their cultivation level, he was very open about soft strength such as experience and insight. In other words, Lu Xiaoyi actually passed the realm of destiny, omnipotence, and the realm of game with the soft strength of a perfected cultivator. It wasn't that he wanted to take advantage of the crow ancestor, but if the crow ancestor didn't deliberately suppress things like experience and insight, he couldn't control himself at all. It was like the soul of an adult fusing into the body of a child. Then, how could you play with these children in the mud and playhouse? In fact, he had taken advantage of all the checkpoints. But he didn't care because he knew that if he became an immortal one day, he would also set up a sword steel and go back to fight the crow ancestor. It was actually the same thing. Victory and defeat were only determined by luck. It was already past the stage of pure strength. There would be no real fairness. Therefore, there was no need to compete with the crow ancestor. He wasn't that shallow. Now, after 50 years of mingling in the sword Dao steel, he planned to break through the realm of life that other swordsmen had never entered. The crow ancestor didn't allow people to enter this realm so easily. It was to prevent some swordsmen who overestimated their strength and cultivated the realm of life in order to slay the sun spirit. This was a very dangerous behavior and was not encouraged. Either you were in the sun spirit perfected cultivator realm and could directly enter this realm, or you had to pass the first 6 realms to prove that you indeed had the ability to kill those of a higher realm. Lu Xiaoyi fulfilled the latter condition. Before he could enter, Banju and a few other perfected cultivators surrounded him. Boss, the area around the sword Dao steel is not very peaceful. Some human cultivators keep poking their heads out. It's probably because we've caused some commotion here in recent years. Some people can't sit still and want to investigate. What should we do? The area around the sword Dao steel had always been a no man's land. It was the swordsman's land by default, but it was not allowed to establish a country. It had always been very subtle. For a gathering of swordsmen of the day like this, no one cared about it in the beginning. Now that some people were looking, they suspected that they were plotting something by not dispersing for 50 years. A great change was imminent, and any caution was not superfluous. Lu Xiaoyi said coldly, "Draw an area and kill as soon as they come in. If we don't do anything, it will make people suspicious. If we really open it, they will be at ease. In the cultivation world, running away won't solve the problem. Even if we want to talk, we have to fight first. Don't worry, beat them to death." You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.